The World of Darkness is a long-standing series of tabletop games that have branched off into comic books, web series, a TV show, and of course, video games. Starting with Vampire the Masquerade in 1991, a new addition to the universe was added yearly for the first 5 years of the series, with each one following the naming trend of something the something. The many entries into the series all collectively added to the overarching lore of the universe, creating a complex setting revolving around the political and secretive influence of fantastical creatures in human society. And yet, despite the World of Darkness's longevity, the series saw most of its success in the 90s and early 2000s, having bounced around between an array of ideas and iterations which mostly saw varying degrees of positive reception. It's a strange journey to wade through, one that started with an eager and ambitious game designer and has more recently produced a slew of text-based mobile games, mixed-review visual novels, a battle royale, VR games, and a couple of ill-received single-player games. Throughout the years, one facet of the series stood head and shoulders above its brethren as the crowning jewel of the World of Darkness universe, Vampire the Masquerade. While much of the modern success of the franchise can be attributed to Troika Games' Bloodlines, the tabletop game itself was and still is widely regarded as one of the top TTRPGs of all time across the board, even claiming the title of Best Role-Playing Game of the Year at the Origins Awards as recently as 2019. Which was only like 3 or so years ago, don't look at the calendar. Still, we talk about video games here. Bloodlines was an absolute mess of development, which seems to be the standard for game creation back in the early 2000s. In a lot of ways, not much has changed. You had a team of 32 people fumbling through Valve's unfinished Source engine, having both the honor and the curse of being the first non-Valve studio to use it to develop their game. The team struggled to sync their code with the new engine, left entire swaths of the game unfinished, and generally had a difficult time developing a real-time action game after only having experience with turn-based ones. To put it plainly, Troika approached Activision and asked if they could work on a genre outside of the then-stale turn-based genre, and then got their collective dicks blown off by the sheer work required to create their vision. Whereas a run-of-the-mill first-person shooter would have somewhere between 10 to 20 animated character models, Bloodlines had over 150 models with thousands of animations, relied on sufficient AI to adapt to a load of player playstyles, and consistently ran over budget and over timelines. Activision eventually stepped in and demanded that the game release by the end of 2004, which led to some employees blaming the publisher for the game's unfinished state and others praising Activision for putting up with their bullshit and repeatedly extending deadlines. The November 2004 release had Bloodlines competing with the likes of Half-Life 2, Halo 2, and Metal Gear Solid 3, the nail in the coffin for Troika games being lined up and struck in one fell swoop as reviewers struggled with a game plagued by bugs, technical issues, and an unfinished story. And that would have been it for the prospect of the Masquerade as a first-person action RPG if it weren't for one gleaming, saving grace: the writing. The magic of Bloodlines' writing perfectly infused the fantastical nature of the World of Darkness and its extensive lore with genuine real-world dialogue that you might expect from an average person.
Giovanni, oh yeah, here's the place. I haven't met you before. You family? Member of the family?
NPCs weren't quest receptacles, they were people with lives that couldn't give a fuck about the player until they forcibly inserted themselves into the quest giver's field of view. And as the game gained a slow but steady traction on the undercurrents of PC gaming as a cult classic, murmurs of a Bloodlines 2 began to emerge by the late 2010s. By this point, the World of Darkness IP had been purchased by Paradox Interactive, who seemed content with letting the franchise rot while cranking out Crusader Hearts of Europa Wonders 5 as a proven moneymaker rather than taking risks. Instead, they leased the license out to Hardsuit Labs, hit developer of... Holy shit, why is it so hard to find what these guys actually made? I know they didn't make all of the shit listed on their site. I mean, they probably helped a bit. I ever tell you that I was in the same 3D animation class as somebody who made a few of the assets for Wasteland 2? This is like if he had a website where he said that he worked on that game. I think the only things that they've actually been in charge of are the now defunct arena shooter Blacklight Retribution and Deadliest Warrior Battlegrounds? Alright, so a real hard hitter on our hands with this studio right out of the gate. Things are moving along with the development. The setting of Seattle has been chosen, the major narrative and factions set. The basic gameplay has been implemented, with the likes of Dishonored being the main source of inspiration for its mechanics. And yet, Bloodlines 2 gets delayed. Once, twice, and Paradox calls the project out from under Hardsuit Labs, passing Bloodlines 2 onto the Chinese room, the developer known for hit walking simulator Dear Esther and advanced walking simulator Amnesia: A Machine for Pigs. To be fair, those credentials are at least narratively a bit better, all things considered, and on paper, the Chinese room set to playing to their strengths, focusing on narrative and player choice first and foremost. Bloodlines 2 was eventually released on October 21, 2025 after a myriad of delays to assure that the game was completed this time around. And the reception was mixed at best. Ironically, the strengths that TCR supposedly touted were what drew the greatest collective criticism, as most critics seem to agree that the writing rang hollow and soulless when compared to its predecessor. I love the first Bloodlines game. It's a muddled, flawed mess of a game, but the writing was fantastic in ways that I couldn't anticipate from looking at its ugly and dated visage. When Bloodlines 2 was announced way back when, I signed up for their marketing emails ready and waiting for news. And when the game was announced that it was put into stasis before TCR was announced as taking the project over, I promptly forgot about it. When it finally released at the tail end of last year, I knew that Bloodlines 2 was going to be one of those games that just irritated me. So why not record a memoir of that irritation and put it out there for other people to watch, right? Right. In this video, I'll be taking a look at Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 and trying to piece together exactly what went wrong, and more importantly, if it deserves the flack that it got from reviewers across the board. Before I begin, I want to let you know that I got a mid-roll advertisement with ExpressVPN like halfway through the video, probably, so try not to be too alarmed. Alright, this entire thing kicks off pretty immediately, not a long drawn-out ordeal or character creator kind of thing, which honestly kind of refreshing in a way. Would I have liked to have customized my guy? Yeah, sure, but getting right into it is pretty welcome. You start off as an elder vampire who has reawakened in some old Seattle warehouse. Quick point of order, an elder is like the upper middle ground of vampire society, basically vampires who were embraced just before the start of the modern age, typically around 300 to 900-ish years old. Many elders have gained power over specific cities across the world over the years. Age isn't always tied to a generation in such a direct manner, as a much more powerful vampire could sire an elder kindred into existence at any given time. But it's still a general rule of thumb that most elders tend to be older even if their generation is tied more to their blood potency than their age. Above elders are the Methuselahs and the Antediluvians, both of which tend to slumber in hidden crypts and are rarely active within the current kindred society. So basically, elders, cream of the crop. Cream of the awake crop. Below elders are the Ancillae. I think it's Ancillae. That's probably how that's said. Who knows, it could be said anyway. It could be said really stupidly. I'm gonna say it as an Ancillae, and this is the only time you're gonna hear it in the entire video, so it doesn't matter. Below elders are the Ancillae, which tend to either piss off the hierarchy to a point where they're killed off or work to be accepted at the big kid table over many years. And below them are your neonates and fledglings, which are the newer kindred who are often treated like children by the higher-up vampires. So in Bloodlines 2, you basically start out as a very powerful vampire, contrasting the fish-out-of-water fledgling experience of Bloodlines 1. As you awaken, a security officer rushes to your aid as you seem to be pretty fucked up after waking up in the old vamp crate. Obviously, you feed on him before shambling down the hall and encountering the guy's buddy who charges at you for some fucking reason.
Who the fuck? You're going down, asshole!
Do not.
Which, on one hand, yes, why did this guy rush us, but on the other hand, that's a pretty damn sick display of power right off the rip. Unfortunately, that's the only real good thing that I have to say about the game so far. Every time Bloodlines 2 walks you through a tutorial section like jumping or feeding or whatever, it pops up with a little codex entry on the screen. I imagine that it'll go away eventually, but clearing it quicker involves opening your journal and having the game tell you that if you literally double jump on air in front of a human, it might cause them to question what they're seeing. I don't think I would have figured that out by myself. Unfortunately, this is a symptom of how the devs approach the gameplay and story, as you're soon introduced to a voice inside your head. Turns out that a vampire detective has somehow been seared into the main character's body, and he has no idea how he got there. This is a problem emblematic of a developer who's too afraid to allow the player to be confused about a game's universe. Let's be honest here, the original Bloodlines was a game that did gain popularity and traction over the years, but was only and has only ever been on PC. It was a game that appealed to a specific type of gamer, one that might be semi-comfortable modding a game to see its full potential shine through. That's a pretty niche audience. Bloodlines 2 is much more accessible, releasing on PC, PS5, and Xbox. It's got more of a mainstream potential immediately, but embodies a universe set decades in the making, with intricacies that might confound somebody who has no exposure to the franchise. So what better way to hold the player's hand through established ideas than having a Navi-esque floating voice to define everything for the player? After all, you're playing as an elder, somebody who has lived for centuries and should thoroughly understand the terminology of the Masquerade's universe. The only other option would be to play the amnesia card and have your exceedingly powerful vampire question the most basic of concepts, or you could just let the player be confused and figure out things for themselves. No, that would be silly, wouldn't it? I mean, imagine if Cyberpunk had Johnny Silverhand constantly going, "Ah yes, gorilla arms, the powerful arm augmentation that gives the user the strength of 10 men.
Torpor. I slept, insensible, for years. I know not how many. Enough that I have no recent memories."
Torpor, huh? The sleep of the dead asleep. Interesting.
And to top off this wonderful inclusion, we have this strange and dated reputation system that's kind of baked into your interactions with the detective named Fabian, who approves or disapproves of the way that you respond to him. The approval system was a novel idea when it premiered, but it's been so memed on since its inception that it feels like a joke every time I say something nice to Fabian and we get hit with the "Fabian like that" dialogue. So here we are, a guy named Fire, who slept for presumably decades, and a guy whose mind was forcibly integrated into Fire's body. It's fucking bizarre, but this is the third game back-to-back where a character has been forced into the player character's mind. First Cyberpunk, then Tainted Grail, which is a game that I started streaming, and now this game. It's like its own genre at this point. Shared consciousness. ShareCon. Whatever. Now mind you, there are stages to this torpor concept. It can last anywhere from a day of sleep to a millennium. We know that our guy has been asleep long enough to not realize how much time has passed, and we know that he's an elder. Elders typically contend with something known as the sleep of ages, which is a death-like stasis that becomes increasingly difficult to resist as a vampire ages. So we have to assume that our guy was asleep for maybe 50 to 100 years, seeing as he knows of Seattle despite being a tad confused about being in America. We also have to assume that Fire is a pseudonym given the obscenely bright and in-your-face rock show posters that line this decrepit, rundown shithole in an almost comically pristine fashion that contrasts with the surroundings. Some detective Fabian is, our guy looked around and picked the brightest word that he could find as his name. Surprised he didn't go with 6-7. So the police are outside because the hallway guy called them in and reported that a meth head attacked his body. We saw these two guys within a span of 20 seconds, so there must have been a third worker who just understands what a meth head attack sounds like, which tracks in Seattle, though the police response time does not. You continue through this tutorial, and the entire time Fabian is like, "Whoa, was that telekinesis, dude? Wow, that's wild." It doesn't help that you have to approach everything in the exact specified order that the devs ordain. I mean, as a player who's familiar with the idea that vampires probably shouldn't be mauling police officers for the fear of instigating full-on retaliation and potentially exposing the existence of the kindred, I figured that it probably wasn't a good idea to walk out the front door and instead found the obvious elevator shaft ahead of time. My powerful fists can't break wood as I'm untrained in the arts of karate. So I have to go to the front door, have Fabian tell me that I shouldn't break the masquerade, and then use my Witcher sense to find the elevator and telekinesis it to death. It's everything that I hate in a modern game, which is surprising given that this isn't a Ubisoft or Activision or EA game. After learning about the ever-obscure concepts of climbing and crouching, the game makes it abundantly clear that you're to follow its instructions or give up on playing it, as using telekinesis on an officer results in a literal game over screen for breaking the masquerade instead of doing something cool like having ramifications later. Of course, I telekinesis the first glowing yellow thing that I saw because I didn't realize that this game wanted me to throw a bottle with my mind. I love that the developers took something as supernatural and awe-inspiring as moving objects with your mind, and the first thing that they could come up with is something that Philadelphia Eagles fans do with their arms any given Sunday.
We're still under a severe storm warning, and it's cold, cold, cold out there. Colder than your favorite team's chances of making it to the playoffs this year. That cold.
Absolutely abysmal year for this game to release given how Seattle did. You push on through this dumpy building while finding out that Fire is 150 years older than America, so born right around the 1620s, making him about 400 years old if the game takes place in the modern day.
What year is this?
The year 2024. When did you...
I have been asleep for 100 years.
You know, on one hand, I thought it was fun to derive a little bit of speculation from the ever so slight amount of puzzle pieces that we've been handed. But I guess I should have realized that a game about a vampire detective being trapped in the brain of an older vampire who has lived a life filled with secrecy wouldn't have a terrible amount of player introspection attached to it. And thank God for that, because the last thing I want to do is get confused by this game's attached lore and intricacies. The best compliment that I can hand this game so far is that the actual movement and combat do feel pretty good, all things considered. Hand-to-hand attacks feel weighty, movements feel snappy. I do feel like a powerful vampire, and that's very important for the game's enjoyment. Like I said when I played the Veilguard, the story was miserable, but the actual combat and gameplay was fun. It's not the thing that I care about the most, but it certainly helps. After decking all of the random ghouls that have made this place their home, Fire wakes up in a nearby apartment building having rested after his, longer rest. This is where we get to discover who this elder is, as Fabian recognizes that he's a bit of a legend known simply as the Nomad. I'm definitely not opposed to this line of questioning, as the answers that Fire give paint a very vivid picture of a traveler who was born in Constantinople before setting across the world and shaking up whatever local scene that he happened upon. Of course, that's the best that we get out of this whole interview, and turning the spotlight on Fabian has him quirking out while he explains the basic concepts in the world of the Masquerade. So let's talk classes, since that's what this whole thing results in. Your classes in this game are less of your traditional fighter, wizard, rogue kind of thing, and instead opt for being a member of one of the 13 major clans. Only 6 of them are options for you to choose from, a step down from the 7 in the first game, though not a major loss. Options that are shared between the two games are your Brujah, Toreador, Tremere, and Ventru. Your Brujah are burlier enforcer types who believe in critical thinking, embracing the idea of rebellion and bold action when the need arises. Opposite in ideology are the Toreador, who are all glitz and glamour, a clan comprised of artists and innovators who revel in the idea of putting on a graceful and eloquent display of beauty first and foremost. The Tremere are your blood wizards who gained respect from their brethren through their raw power and penchant for treachery. And the Ventru are the self-proclaimed nobility of the vampire world, placing their role firmly in the leading of businesses while delving into politics. Our new additions to the Bloodlines games come in the form of the Banu Hakim and the La Sombra. The former are a clan of vampire assassins who have kept to themselves until very recently. They're historically viewed as dangerous and cultish by the other clans, a viewpoint born of ignorance and a fear of the unknown. The reality is that their culture tends to be more scholarly in nature, doing their best to distance themselves from the infighting that the other kindred succumb to so easily. The La Sombra, on the other hand, are the epitome of selfishness, who see the harnessing of magic as a tool to crush anybody who gets in their way, while remaining extremely shaky with their allegiances. While the Gangrel, Nosferatu, and Malkavian clans have been dumped as options in the second game, I'd say that this is still a solid batch of clans to choose from. That said, when looking at the abilities that they get, only a few really stand out as being wholly unique from the others, at least in terms of combat prowess. Your Bruja are your strong boy fist types, the Banu Hakim roguish stealth types, and the Lasombra fiendish warlock types. But the rest kind of fall into a mix of these classes, like the Tremere seem to be all about blood magic, having abilities that make a target explode or their blood boil, which are similar but cool effects. But then they get blood daggers, which are just ranged throwing weapons, like there's no real advantage to them over a gun unless they fire automatically, which they don't. And when you start to play the game, it becomes apparent fast that there are no permanent weapons that you can use, be they melee or ranged. And that's fine for somebody like me who tends to stick to more melee-oriented builds in games, given that I only intend to play through this game once. But even if you could make the argument that an Elder Vampire will always be able to outdamage weaponry with their sheer power, it's a dark mark on this game in terms of player choice, culling different playstyles with one fell swoop. And beyond that, you had Prince LaCroix's sheriff who wielded a giant-ass slab of a sword, showing off the idea that even an older vampire can make use of specific weapons. I don't know. Beyond the blood stuff, the Tremere also have a teleport ability which is shared with the Lasombra and the Toreador, even if they all have slightly different constraints. The Ventrue clan seems to have taken the idea of a suave and charismatic vampire and has muddled all of that into the idea that they can just manipulate people. Possess a person, command them to off themselves, make them forget that you're here, all of that stuff that other classes do more directly. Like, I just don't see the point in picking a Ventrue unless they're much better at dialogue than other clans. And the Toreador kind of just does a mix of what all of the other clans do. Move fast, manipulate people, blink away. Don't get me wrong, you can see the influence of Dishonored in all of this, which is always welcome. The actual combat abilities look awesome. I don't think I'd be dissatisfied with any of these options, but I also don't feel that roleplay connection to any of them. In the first game, I had a very hard time deciding between the Toreador and the Bruja. The former was kind of this romantic, smooth-talking character that could talk people into seeing things their way, and the latter was the more gruff, combat-oriented rebel. And I ultimately went with the Toreador because I felt like it had the most potential for netting an experience that went beyond cool combat capabilities. But even then, I saw the appeal in the ever-crazy Malkavian or the sewer-hiding Nosferatu. There was genuine intrigue in the idea of playing through the game as one of these factions. Bloodlines 2, on the other hand, is a no-brainer when it came to selecting any sort of clan. Nothing that I've seen has pointed towards the idea that my dialogue options are going to matter, that I'll be playing a role the way that I want to. So the Bruja was the one who stuck out to me as the coolest in combat, so that's what I went with in a heartbeat. Your first task involves tracking down Fabian's body, and this leads to an encounter so confusingly inept in its dialogue that my mind shut down when I watched it.
Well met, kin.
The hell you call me, runoff?
Only what I would call anyone who hailed from the learned clan.
Motherfucker. You really ain't no thin blood, are you?
Thin blood? Of weak heritage, a latter generation. They are common here?
The hell kind of rock you been hiding under? Yeah, they're common. Like fleas on a street cat.
You are out hunting for sport? Or is this your duty as sheriff?
My duty? My fucking duty? Yeah, maybe it is my duty. Maybe it's a duty we should all have been fucking paying more attention to. I thought you had a stick up your ass. Seems I was right. But much as this is fun and all, I got places to be.
Will you tell your prince we spoke?
Fuck the Camarilla. Fuck the prince.
Let's try to break this scene down and figure out why my brain went blank. So you have a sheriff here named Benny. Sheriffs are the enforcers that report directly to a prince of a city, and depending on how the city is structured, the Primogen Council. So Benny here is currently hunting down thin-blooded vampires, whose existence are believed to be a sign of the end times. Long story short, a thin blood is created when a vampire with weak blood further dilutes their power by embracing a human. Although a thin blood does have a strength that goes beyond the average human and can often walk in sunlight, they're generally regarded as trash that will wind up breaking the masquerade and causing trouble for the kindred with a stronger bloodline. Depending on the region, thin bloods are usually hunted down for sport or for the good of the Camarilla, a sect of vampires who seek to uphold the masquerade at all costs. So Benny here mistakes you for a thin blood, realizes that you aren't one, and then seems confused about you defining what a thin blood is. Now, while it's hard to blame the sheriff for reacting this way, he should have also had the knowledge that vampires have the ability to sleep for a long-ass time. And yet, it doesn't even cross his mind as he barks at you to get the fuck out of Seattle for some reason instead of doing any sort of due diligence and figuring out who you are. It's conflict for the sake of conflict, and it's capped off by this stupid-ass line where he outwardly admonishes his prince, the most powerful vampire in the city, and his boss, to a complete stranger who he knows nothing about. I could have easily been a visiting friend of the prince from another city, and this guy's just mouthing off in the most outwardly treasonous way possible. So setting aside the downright laughable dialogue, we have a threat that's been written into the game for no real good reason that I can come up with beyond attempting to infuse intrigue into the writing while introducing more of the universe's terminology. And the reality is that all of this could have been spelled out in a similar but much more natural fashion. As in, Benny goes to attack Fire, realizes that he's not a thin blood because of how powerful he is, quizzes him on his identity, and then demands that he go check in with his boss. If you want to work in the idea that he doesn't like the prince or disagrees with their leadership, fine, but do that later. As things stand, this was a jumbled mess of dialogue that felt more like a B-movie than a lovingly crafted story in a rich and complex universe. Now, I will say that heading to find Fabian's body has you getting into some real combat with rogue vampires known as Anarchs, and while I personally have no reason to kill them beyond them just being wholesale hostile, the encounter showcases just how incredibly well done this game's combat is. I mean, yes, I mentioned it before, but this is just really fucking satisfying in the best way. Everything feels perfectly crafted to show off the unrivaled strength of an elder kindred, and I was genuinely smiling at various points throughout it. This is a shining beacon for this game, and goes a long way towards keeping me wanting to play despite my disdain for the dialogue and setup thus far. Finding Fabian's body has the two discovering that the detective was sent to open this trunk containing Fire's body. Upon awakening from torpor, Fire was so hungry that he went into a frenzy, draining the first blood carrier that he saw and killing Fabian on the spot. There's an entire backdrop to the idea of a vampire consuming another vampire down to their soul, and this kind of lore working its way into Bloodlines 2 is easily the best part of the game's writing so far. But again, it's more because of the lore's latent concepts rather than the writers doing anything terribly interesting with it. Well, I guess you could say that a Malkavian detective being trapped in your guy's mind is interesting, but I feel like Fabian's character so far mars this idea rather than causing it to shine. It almost feels like the idea of a vampire absorbing the soul and personality of another would make for a better side quest than a main story. Regardless, the premise of diablerie is brought up, the act of consuming another vampire, which is frowned upon by the Camarilla and is often viewed in the same vein as cannibalism. In the tabletop game, the act imbues a lesser vampire with the power of the greater one if the lesser one is the one eating, and a greater one with immense pleasure unparalleled to anything else if they're the one chowing down. So in this case, something unprecedented has happened, likely related to the mark on the back of Fire's hand, and now Fabian's personality and memory have been etched within the protagonist. With this information, we're of course directed to meet with the prince.
Prince Campbell, yeah.
We're gonna kick you
I don't
in the
know, there's
teeth.
something... I can't say why, but...
Doesn't matter if you have one ass cheek and 3 toes. I
Not
will
right
beat
now.
your ass.
Due to the Malkavians' hunch, we instead opt for meeting with the previous prince, who continues to hold a sizable amount of power from the shadows of Seattle. Mind you, Malkavians are known for being eccentric lunatics, but yeah, sure, fuck it. Let's just follow his lead mindlessly. Heading to the hotel where the former prince is supposed to be holed up has a couple of things happening. One, we get a flashback cutscene showing a fresh to the vampire world Fabian presenting himself to the former prince. And 2, coming back to reality has us being greeted with a trail of kindred corpses lining the otherwise opulent penthouse. Before engaging in conversation with the former prince named Lou Graham, the game issues a warning about how if you talk to people rudely, they will view you as rude. Awesome, great to hear. Speaking with Lou has her giving you the pomp and arrogant Ventrue treatment, though she also recognizes Fire as the Nomad and seems to be elated by it. We don't know why yet, she just is. She explains that the Anarch vampires just killed Prince Campbell 2 nights ago, and now a replacement is running things. Lou still has all of the power, she just runs things from the shadows. While the conversation itself isn't terribly natural, I do have to admit that the setup is easily the most interesting part of the game's writing so far. To summarize, we have this lady who purposefully stepped back into the shadows and still feels like she's running the city. We have a prince who seems to have died to an increasingly powerful group of rogue vampires and a replacement who was trained expressly by Lou. And we have a sheriff who seems to be upset with that replacement.
The best of America's intellect and culture. The best music too, even if the last few decades have been unfortunate.
That's the second time that joke's been made, and we're at the front part of this game. Hopefully that's a fluke. There's nothing worse than somebody repeating the same joke over and over, but louder each time. So we head off to meet the new prince and...
Oh, don't look so surprised, little flame. The first stage of my process is observation.
And a Toreador, I take it.
So brutalist. But I suppose that comes with the territory?
I try not to dunk on random voice actors because it really is difficult to tell if something is bad because of the VA's performance or the direction that they were given. But what in the fuck is this?
I have something rather special planned. Once, it might have taken your breath away. If you're open to new experience. It's been, what, decades since she left that musty old penthouse?
It sounds like this lady isn't sure what her next word is going to be until she gets to it. Jesus Christ. Alright, moving on. The Anarchs are still out in droves, attacking the tower where the prince resides directly, leading to a stint of excellent combat as we've come to appreciate. Here you meet Tali, a Nosferatu whose voice heavily contrasts with the established norm for the clan.
Name's Michael Tolliver, but call me Tali. I'm your go-to gal for fun times at the OK Camarilla.
You may call me Fire.
I may. Guess you're here to see her princeship? New kid checking in and all that, right?
Now, mind you, the whiplash in voice acting is incredible, and I actually really like Tali as an idea. However, to my knowledge, Nosferatu historically have a sort of rattling, raspy, gross quality to them.
Don't bother with the introductions, fledgling. I know who you are.
I got access to all kinds of goodies.
Nosferatu have a sixth sense of humor.
You are a dead thing, a creature of the shadows. Start acting like one.
It's something that disgusts other clans, particularly the more eloquent Ventrue. And while I'm not opposed to the subversion of expectations, especially given Tali's more traditional appearance, it would have been nice if Fire at least commented on his voice and there was some reason thrown out there as to why it hasn't been affected, either through luck or practice. Our next character on this tour of characters would be, God damn it, what's this girl's name? You go from Campbell to Lou to Benny to Isabella with Hawaii to Tali and Sophia. Her name is Sophia. Shit's a blunderbuss of information and about 10 minutes of gameplay, but whatever. Anyways, Sophia plays the role of somebody whose personality does not exist unless they are faking it, as she seems to embody that ridiculously high int but low wisdom score. It's like she's constantly playing dumb. She's like, "How do I know you're not an intruder?" And I'm like, "Calm yourself, my name is Fire." And she's like, "That's what an intruder might say." And then she goes, "Oh wait, I know exactly who you are. You're the Nomad, the faceless wanderer who is famous for changing his name and appearance across centuries." Bro, what in the fuck are the writers doing? You can't just throw a catty joke in about how this woman is a naive genius, and then have her recognize your guy after a few moments of him merely existing in front of her. I mean, you can, but what's the point of it beyond making it sound like a B-movie? The best part about Bloodlines was how realistic the dialogue was, and now we have a follow-up where everybody talks and acts like a caricature. Stepping into the office of Prince Ryong Choi once again displays a conversation rife with a lack of direction. And the worst part about it is that it's salvageable, because let's set aside the specifics for a moment. At its core, the base idea of Bloodlines 2 is that monsters are ruling a very profitable and powerful city, and they aren't so different from the real-world ones in power today. The CEOs, the ones who command and lead, who give permission to others to tread freely through their domain, they're all vampires who are savvy to what needs to be done in order to protect themselves and their order. There's certainly an allure to that idea, one that can be pitched as both a message and a parody. It treads the line between real-world events and the fiction of a vampiric society. And little quips made by the game, such as a magazine mocking Trump's small loan of $1 million quotes, serve to deepen that connection. The issue is the messy execution. To claim that every part of this conversation is a mess would be an overreaction, because it isn't all that bad. There are solid strings of dialogue that further spell out Choi's role in the city, her image as the new prince being her #1 priority. But all of that is weakened by the pacing of the dialogue, which once again plays out less like a real conversation between real people and more of a surge of information directed entirely at the player. Choi recognizes that there's something different about fire. Paired with Sophia's recognition, this makes Benny out to be somebody who should have never made it up to his current role within the Camarilla. You could say that his treatment of fire was due to how angry he currently is, but you're now pushing the responsibility of filling the blanks onto the player. Regardless, Choi continues to move the conversation onward by summoning Sophia and Tali from seemingly nowhere as they pop into frame at her command. This disjointed tract of information only exacerbates the poor flow of dialogue, as we go from, "Who are you?" to, "Oh right, you're the legendary Nomad," to, "Well, Sheriff Benny is going nuts out there," to, "I heard reports that you broke the masquerade when you awoke from your torpor," to, "Anyways, gotta go talk to Lou, see you later." Like literally, it's just back to back to back to back to back like that. There's no connection, there's no bridging of those information gaps. None of these topics flow into each other in a measured and normal way, they're just suddenly brought up back to back. Choi doesn't make a connection from Fire being a vampire legend to having any sort of understanding about his actions when he woke up a century later. She doesn't address how he should pay for breaking the masquerade, immediately moving on to needing to meet with Lou to discuss what's happening with the Anarchs and Campbell's death. It's just a constant barrage of information before it all ends, and the result winds up with Fire deciding to go rest until his next objective is thrust upon him. Oh, and to cap it all off, this entire tower excursion was built verbatim like a video game level. The elevator doesn't work, so we have to climb up the whole damn tower manually, and when you're finished with your meeting, the fucking elevator works again. I don't know, it's not like an affront to gaming kind, but it's definitely the mushroom stamp on this entire cock-up. Fire leads to bed, and it's time for Fabian to take over for some memory traversal. This was a weird one for me. Like, I enjoy the base idea you're now in the shoes of a Malkavian detective, which attempts to scratch that itch which was missing from Fire's clan selection. The big problem is that while I don't dislike Fabian, I don't really like him either. There's definitely something to be said about having a voiceless playable character or one who is fully voiced, and I understand the appeal to both. Fabian unfortunately falls into a very specific genre of character where the voice acting and direction has to be top-notch in order to derive the most enjoyment out of playing somebody who's crazy but competent. When playing a Malkavian in the previous game, a lot of the dialogue really only worked as well as it did because you were playing a voiceless protagonist. Had things been fully voiced, it would have taken a very specific vocal performance to capture the insanity in ways that players imagined it. And I'm not necessarily faulting the voice actor on this one because Fabian is written to be less unhinged and more quirky. He talks like a 1930s noir detective, which is supposed to be the entire draw to his Malkavian-inspired antics. He rattles off anecdote after anecdote, monologues internally about the people who he's surrounded by, and generally behaves in a way that's more akin to a carefree top-end Redditor than somebody who actually gives a shit about anything. He'll talk about how him and the elevators don't get along, an allusion to the infamous stop sign, or talking to the TV scenes in the first Bloodlines game, which feels more like fan service or like the writer was told that Malkavians just talk to inanimate objects all the time. And to top all of this off, the supporting cast that he's surrounded by isn't really up to snuff to pull me in either.
Baby, ooh, it's so wonderful to see you. Mommy have a baby soon. Lemony moss. So personal fun, baby, ooh. Drunk nice and warm, takes cares, eat 'em up.
So Fabian goes about his casework, a detective who has an arrangement with Seattle's police department that allows him to work in the back rooms while feeding on volunteers when he needs to. All of his powers are focused on roleplay rather than combat, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but only makes you miss that kind of inclusion when you're playing as Fire, who's literally all combat. His first power is the Jedi Mind Wipe, making people forget things. He uses this to make the officer up front forget that Fabian owes him $30. It's another one of these tutorial sections where the developers go, "See? Look, you can do this," instead of just telling the player that they have this power and then letting them explore or roleplay for themselves. But the intent behind Fabian's segment also becomes apparent quick when the player is told that they can speed up time and quickly navigate to the next main chunk of story rather than cutting him loose in any sort of way. This is the reality of a developer like the Chinese Room taking over a franchise where you're historically allowed to do whatever you want and approach things with a certain amount of freedom. When your most famous game was a walking sim, this is the kind of gameplay that you're going to fall back on as a crutch. This could have easily been one of the best parts of Bloodlines 2, a section of the game where Fabian is presented with a few different casework options and then you as the player decide how to approach the detective segment while solving various mysteries. Instead, we get a guided tour, the invisible hand of the narrative pressing you to the end of the memory without any real choice in your approach. So here's how this goes down. Fabian walks downtown dressed like he's about to get a role in a movie about the 1920s. He talks to the guy who claims that a woman has been spouting on about sires and masquerades publicly but isn't a vampire. So Fabian goes to talk to this woman, who looks at our detective and goes, "Wow, you're the most detective-looking detective ever," and then refuses to talk to him.
Am I breaking a law or something, detective? Because if not, you'd better leave.
I realized this wasn't going to work. She was too fixated on the whole detective ensemble.
No fucking shit, she's looking directly at a cop and refusing to talk to you because of that. What? You've got to be the worst fucking detective I've ever seen. Except he's not, because he has cool vampire powers. And the next one has him able to impersonate somebody that she knows by muddling her mind to think that he's... okay, look, our detective has no fucking idea who she's looking for. And when you use this mask of many faces trick and then choose the wrong dialogue option, she's like, "Whoa, you're trying to trick me." And instead of there just being some alternative path, some kind of wrong answer turned right, you just try again. Like the game might as well have cut to a game over screen and had you reload. You have presented a character and story setting with the absolute most potential for having options, and have given the player zero options to work with besides the correct path. A detective game is like the quintessential vehicle for player choice, and you've dashed that away immediately. What are we doing here?
I'm pleased to see you again, my child.
I mean, you're not my sire, obviously, because he's the one who sent me. I think I know what you are.
Glad she knew that, because I had no idea what she thought I was. I'd have to play this carefully. You do, huh?
Wait, there's something not right here.
I can hear your heart. That soft pulsation. You are nervous, child.
Don't be silly. I don't have a heartbeat anymore. You are one of his friends, aren't you?
Oh, yes. I know your sire.
Please tell me, who are you?
I am thirsty. Should we share a bite?
You think this is funny?
I have no fucking earthly idea what the right answer is to these questions. There are no ways to discover it, no notepad nearby, no questions that we can ask before using our powers. It's completely fucking random. This entire sequence takes the worst part about an old point-and-click adventure and combines it with a lack of the best part. Long story short, dumbass here was sent to talk to Fabian specifically, bearing a message about being cautious of some biblical symbol or another. We go ask the bouncer what he saw, have to use another power to read his thoughts, and figure out that the girl was dropped off in a limo. And then when we head back to the girl, it turns out that her head and blood were misplaced. The final Malkavian ability has you able to speak to the dead, but it's not really speaking to them as much as imagining what they would say if they were still alive, or if they were a ghost, I guess. It's a really odd ability because it's not provable magic like boiling somebody's blood is. It's just Fabian using all of his powers of observation combined with searching his memory for clues. It's so difficult to fairly assess the writing when it ranges from poor to decent, because this really isn't all that bad. The narrative is pretty intriguing. You want to know who did this and why they were trying to contact Fabian in this manner. But it's hard to go from holy shit, this gameplay and writing is fucking ass, to I'm really invested in this. Regardless, things do get interesting here. Talking to the victim here reminds Fabian of one of his first detective cases, and it causes him to be transported from this memory of a girl in 2024 to a different memory in the Prohibition era 1920s or early 30s. Now mind you, the event that sparks Fabian's memory is that a girl was literally murdered in this exact same way with this exact same imagery in this exact same location. Which, on one hand, yes, he's a Malkavian vampire and has ample reason to not remember every grisly murder, but on the other hand, I mean, this is a pretty fucking obvious connection that a detective should make. Still, I'm positively baffled that the writers didn't think to have Fabian go, wow, here I am, back in the 1920s. Like, I'm stunned by that after the amount of hand-holding that we got before this. I guess they figured tinting everything sepia should do the trick. It's like this game's Mexico yellow filter. Either way, Fabian figures out that the killer had to be a human vampire hunter, and then we're deposited back into the role of Fire, who intends to go meet with the prince once more, but this time at the same club where those murders took place in the past.
I'm a local boy, born and raised around here. Of course, things were different back then. Worse infrastructure, better music.
Yo, does anybody else think that the current music is bad? Upvotes if you agree. The meeting winds up with the prince asking you to go find Benny, something that I already volunteered for. The whole story is just a railroad completely displaced from the first game's play options, if that wasn't clear by now. We follow the blood trail, figure out where Benny's sire is, and interrogate him. The sire is a sniveling coward, subverting the expectations of what a sire typically is, which, yeah, sure, what a twist, but these twists work well like they do in other games because the player is invested in the plot and aren't expecting them. I wasn't expecting the sire here to look like a random teenager, but I also don't care. Either way, the sire tells us where Benny likely is, and then when we go to turn to leave, he goes, oh, yo, wait, that symbol on your hand? It looks like this ring that Benny had. What the fuck is the point of this subplot if you just stumble onto information without even asking about it? This game is an advanced walking simulator with combat that was likely done by a more competent studio. For all of my negativity about Hardsuit Labs earlier. Dudes know how to combat. Well, kind of. NPC awareness seems to be quite the issue here as I leap on Anarch after Anarch without a care or worry about being sighted. I mean, sure, eventually I do get caught, but stealth doesn't seem to be too difficult in this game, suffice to say. So Benny got himself captured by these dudes who staked his heart and sealed his body in cement until they could presumably get to torturing him to a final death or whatever. Unstaking him has him reviving so that we can question him, which leads to absolutely zero answers because he's just plain uncooperative. I love how the only time that we've ever had a conversation with Benny before this had him calling you a weak piece of shit and telling you to get the fuck out of town. And now he's like, I should have known that they would send you. Whatever. So you ask him about the ring and he just laughs? And then he breaks free from the cement, leading to a boss fight that goes something like this. There's a point where the Anarchs come to reinforce the fight, but something tells me that they're only shooting at me for whatever reason. I just ignored them anyway. When all is said and done, the Anarch leader shows herself and goes, "Alright, leave Benny here with me or we'll kill you." And this is the first real choice that we've had in this game. Either bring Benny back to the prince and gain the favor of the massively successful Camarilla, or leave Benny with this Anarch woman who we've literally never seen until now and whose forces we just shredded. There is nothing compelling me whatsoever to side with this woman unless I'm achievement hunting or something. So yeah, I'm just gonna ditch these dipshits for the real power in this city. Of course, their threats of never letting me out of here alive with Benny ring hollow immediately when the leader goes, "Fine, take him. And if you want to chat sometime, come meet with me." Always love when the game is afraid of irreparable consequences. You head back to the prince, she makes you the new sheriff, and now the game really begins as you're free to pick whatever quest you want to do in any order. Easy now, TCR, gotta be careful with that player choice. I gotta know though, right? What happens when you choose to give Benny to the Anarchs? I can't imagine that you would still be the sheriff afterwards. Here's the problem, this game has no manual saving for whatever reason. I mean, maybe this exact reason. So I looked it up. And man, the entire game takes on a new tone when you side with the Anarchs. Choi declares you an enemy of the Camarilla and pushes you out the window after staking your heart. And just before her people can get to your body, the Anarchs step in and launch a surprise attack, using the chaos to grab your body and allow you to recover under their watch. Nah, I'm kidding. Prince Choi makes you the sheriff.
Say hello to our new sheriff.
Interesting.
What? Sheriff? But what do you say, Fire?
This is not what I expected.
I know full well what you expect. I served under it for decades. But I'm not that prince. Ego, anger, and dick measuring get us nowhere. But business, diplomacy, a level head. Now we're talking.
Man, business people are so cool, always making deals with people who went back on their word. This really says a lot about society. When the map opens up, the game lets you know that you can start feeding off of specific humans for different types of blood. If you save up enough points, you can cash them in along with your XP to gain any of the other clan abilities, which makes choosing a clan pretty much damn near worthless and completely wrecks any sort of replayability that this game would have if it were good. I mean, the only point in choosing a clan is that you get one specific clan passive that you can't get if you're playing any of the other clans. To get these upgrades, you talk with a representative from each of the clans and then drink a cup of their blood. Each one has the personality of a cardboard cutout that has a definition written on it. The edgy one, the rebellious one, the eloquent one, you get it. I have absolutely zero interest in talking with them, and their introductory dialogue has them spelling out how quirky they are before immediately jumping into business, making it abundantly clear that they're only here as a mechanic and not as a character.
This is my magnum opus. Name's Patience, by the way. Don't make a joke, I already heard it. So the in crowd at the court say we've got to help you wake up some of your old strength.
Name's Silky. This is my place. These are my people. Ryong sent the word round that some of us should offer help to—
This is my shop. It is where the mortals come to make debts they cannot repay. Sometimes I feed on them, but mostly I enjoy their charming knickknacks. The prince has ordered us to help you.
Let's get a couple things straight. You may be my elder, but I report to Lou, and to the prince, not to you. I got one job, and that's to protect her by any means necessary. Ryong wants us to help you.
You may call me Mrs. Thorne. I already know who you are. One must conduct oneself with proper decorum if one doesn't want to get fucked over. Weaver Tower have informed us that we must help you away.
Tell me about the Dutchman.
I named it for an old lover.
Indeed.
He was Dutch.
I named the Dutchman after an old lover. He was Dutch. Holy fucking shit, this is Game of the Year writing. Mind you, if you do try to slog through the dialogue, every single one is just you getting hammered by their one-note personality until they give you some fetch quests and you get the option to say, "I'm interested in you." From what I can tell, none of them are interested back besides the La Sombra, though I also kept failing to get on their good side. The Brujah leader launches into this diatribe of poetic musing for some reason, and I tried to counter with my own poetic saying. He goes, "Wow, that's pretentious." The Toreador sculptor, who's supposed to be all about art and flowery words, asks you what you think her sculpture is supposed to represent. I say, "It seems to be about individualism and the creative spirit." She goes, "Wow, that's pretentious." Jesus fucking Christ, if the Toreador doesn't appreciate pretentiousness, something is going incredibly wrong. I don't know. It feels like the writers didn't really care to explore the depths of what these clans could be or the personalities that they could encompass. And that's definitely an annoying thing to wade through when you're approaching as somebody who understands and appreciates the subtleties of the VTM universe. But the much graver mistake to me is that every single one of these people are incredibly boring. They all answer your questions directly as if they have a cheat sheet of how they should respond. And none of them do anything to garner interest in themselves or their clan. It's the polar opposite of how the dialogue was approached in the first Bloodlines game, and it's by far the hardest thing for me to forgive. The crazy part about the ability system is that the base idea of it wouldn't be terrible if it were implemented in a more creative way. Like, a Brujah shouldn't be able to have a Tremir's blood manipulation abilities, but imagine if somebody as unique as the Nomad decided to try to learn them anyway, and the outcome mixed that brute strength of a Brujah's fist attacks with coagulated blood, giving them a unique effect that can only be realized through this very particular mix of clan abilities. Likewise, a Tremir's blood daggers might be able to be mixed with a Ventru's manipulation powers, allowing you to throw daggers that can cause somebody to start fighting for you after a few seconds pass by and the effect kicks in. Instead, any clan that you choose can just beat everything if you decide to hunt down humans for their blood. So yeah. And on top of this, one of the three blood types is downright stupid to gather compared to the others. The first one has you seducing somebody who follows you to a deserted alley or the like. The second one has you pissing somebody off who you then have chase you to a place away from prying eyes. But the third one has you intimidating somebody who runs away from you. And while they do tend to try to run to places that are less populated, there always seems to be people around. Like, the amount of homeless people is staggering. And I usually just have to take a chance and hope that I'm not going to get caught, and then end the feed early so that I'm not pursued by police.
Let us get rough.
I've got a few bucks. Take it. Leave me alone. Why won't anyone help me?
Wanna fuck each other up?
To top all of this off, how people respond to you depends on what you're wearing. So you have to swap outfits constantly whenever you're looking for a new color of blood. What a stupid fucking system. Meeting with Sophia has her horny for you as she has been, but what she really wants for you is to find her 3 missing ghouls who were kidnapped by the Anarchs. While fighting is fun, this game begins to unravel even more as it becomes clear that you can just run up to the vans where these kidnapped vampires are, break the locks, and then the nearby Anarchs disappear. This kind of thing just continues to pile on to just how little thought was put behind anything in this game, because everything is kinda like this. There's a single button to get to any of your stuff, the escape key. No M button for map, no J button for journal, no tab button for appearances or abilities. You can't click and drag the map around, only use WASD to move it. When you click on a point of interest to mark the map, it exits the map. You have to click the points of interest again to unmark them even if you've already visited the location and talked to the person. Rebinding keys doesn't have the game changing the image of the key on the UI when you're prompted to use the power that it corresponds to. Humans will actively try to break into cars 3 feet away from police officers, and yet everybody notices if you're even remotely within eyesight and try to chomp somebody. When leading people away to feed on them, your stupid eyeball UI to indicate whether you're seen or not is always indicating that you're being watched, even if it's the person who's willfully following you to a feeding spot. Groups of different blooded people will disappear whenever you choose to feed on one and then come back immediately. It doesn't matter which gender of person that you feed on, the game randomizes their voice after you bite them.
Need someone to warm you up tonight?
When the police get involved, helicopters spin up instantly no matter what they've seen you do. It's just a non-stop barrage of shit that pulls your attention away from any kind of immersion. So you head back to Sophia, and she's sad that one of her ghouls died, giving you the opportunity to cheer her up. Here's the thing. Sophia hails from the Tremere clan, a group that's known for their lust for power and treachery. And yet Sophia approaches you like a shy nerd who loves research and studying. When she initially encountered the Nomad, she was instantly all over him, playing the girl with a crush immediately and seemingly trying to endear him to her. And when she started to ask for favors right off the bat, I had this idea tickle the back of my mind. What if this is all an act to get us to trust her, and her Tremere background eventually shines through when she reveals that she was using fire for some sort of gain? It wouldn't take a genius writer to take a Tremere and have them play the wolf in sheep's clothing, and it would certainly explain why she laid it on thick from the get-go. From here we move back to Lou. She of course also has a task for you, which involves speaking to her newly appointed gangrel servant about procuring the correct blood source for Lou. At this point, the idea of being an elder who's a legendary figure in his own right kinda just falls flat. I mean, with the way that these quests are set up, it feels like Fire should have been a respected Ancillay who's working his way up the food chain. Oh, I guess I do say Ancillay again. I get that we're kind of playing the sheriff role just so that we can gather information about his handmark and work on restoring the full power of him, but it also feels like our tasks are set up like we're proving ourselves. Like any kindred working under the Camarilla could accomplish what Fire is undertaking here. Of course, the writing tone is as inconsistent as ever. Lou describes her gangrel servant in a way that makes her sound like your stereotypical caricature of a West Coast millennial.
I tune out most of her babble, but it is incessant. Despite my best efforts, I can tell you that never mind was better than rumors. And that the Idaho steelheads are having a good season. And that the gourmet coffee down the street smells over-extracted.
And then when you go to meet her, she's very clearly supposed to be this Idaho-raised redneck who got swiped off of her farm by a roaming pack of gangrel vampires.
They all taste the same to me, like chicken nuggets on legs.
It's like nobody actually took the time to revise what was written. It was just all fired off the top of the writers' heads and finalized. The Anarch leader Katsumi is the last one to visit for now, and she just wants you to hunt down some rogue Anarchs who keep breaking the Masquerade so that her people don't pay for their actions. Now you may have noticed that Katsumi is wearing a doctor's outfit complete with a stethoscope. That's because she's a doctor.
I was a surgeon way back.
The subtlety in this game is on the same level as a 4th grader's writing. You take out the rogue Anarchs, head back to Katsumi, and she's like, wow, you and I could really get along.
Must you do that?
Do what?
The smoke does nothing to your lungs, good or bad. Why bother? I will let you get back to your night.
And now it's bedtime again. More dreams as you would expect, this time a case involving a woman who's received a death threat along with a cross identical to the one that was left at the scene of the last case. There's something to the idea of a Malkavian detective. I know it's been fun poking and prodding at the game's uninspired ideas and bland writing, but Fabian's occupation is overall a good idea. The Malkavian clan has always been portrayed as wise and poetic madmen whose lunacy stems from being able to see too much of how the world works at once. Likewise, they tend to be able to predict the future to a small degree and read the meaning behind dreams, their empathy towards those with trauma leading them along through their unlife. The main point of contact that we've had in these games before Fabian was Jeanette Vorman and her sister Therese in the first game, two distinct Malkavian personalities sharing a single body while swapping back and forth seemingly at random. These two were the standard for Malkavian writing along with the first game's primogen, Alistair Grout. And of course, the player could choose the clan for themselves, which brought about a less serious shade of what a Malkavian could be. And the more that Fabian goes through his dream state, the more that it becomes clear that while his occupation and general idea behind him is actually good, he isn't written with the same eccentricity and general intrigue that the Vorman sisters were written with. When Fabian does attempt to exude that Malkavian charm, it feels more like he's being quirky and less like he's genuinely afflicted with an ongoing lunacy that endears him to the player. It feels like he's cosplaying. Seeing him interact with the death threat letter has him speaking to himself as if he is the letter, almost as if this scene was written to capture the magic of the stop sign in the first game. But let's be clear about this. The stop sign scene was successful because it was a quick little inclusion that happened almost randomly as a one-off in the least expected way. It was about 4 blocks of dialogue spanning 2 options each, and then it's over. It's supposed to be a funny little encounter that you move on from and doesn't define the player character. Jeanette and Therese weren't consistently speaking with clocks and tables, and yet this idea has become a cornerstone of Fabian's behavior, first with the victim's corpse and now with this letter. It doesn't feel like magical clairvoyance that flows through Fabian's Malkavian blood. It feels like a quirky detective who could easily be a human that imagines things this way to help him think and recall fragments of his own memory. I guess to put it more plainly, Fabian feels like somebody cooked up his personality without really understanding the depth of what a Malkavian could encompass. It's like that friend in the D&D group who plays an elven ranger and their entire personality is hyper-focused on their bear companion instead of coming up with anything truly unique. Not all elven rangers need to be stuck-up hippies who only care about their animal companion, just like not all Malkavians are Deadpool types who break the fourth wall and prattle onto objects. In that regard, the first game's player character portrayal of a Malkavian really didn't help the sensation of the clan just being these wacky, goofy dudes who pull out a spork and shout random one-liners. The antics that you were often engaging in worked for a non-serious and fun playthrough, but were far and away from the deeper exploration of mental illness that the Vorman sisters and the Malkavian primogen brought to the table. What's more, Malkavians are typically extremely empathetic, to an almost annoying degree. They tend to come from the academic or healthcare industries, their natural affinity for looking after people and wanting to help steering them towards those job types that will allow them to tap into the well of emotion that accompanies those professions. This is why a detective who solves cases for those in need is a good fit. But Fabian is written to be a snarky douche of a detective, one who oversleeps and doesn't care if it affects anyone, or openly makes fun of them for sounding stupid.
Being honest, it's kind of a blur. But if you're gonna tell me I wrote the letter myself, I will not believe you.
Oh, I'm certain you couldn't do that, even sober. Some of these words are multisyllabic.
There's no desire to help this woman or ease her fears. It's just this detective playing the cool guy repeatedly as he occasionally Jimmy Neutrons inside his head to come up with new leads to chase. And this trend continues as our detective goes to speak with the filing cabinet next instead of just opening it and finding the notes on an older case. It feels like a vampire power for no other reason than to just be a vampire power. And it only makes me care less as we slog through a segment that should arguably have the most intrigue. Ironically, the game does stride to get closer to that detective chasing leads idea that I was pining for initially. Execution is about what you would expect from it though, as the game prompts you to open a map to follow the leads, but then all of the leads pertain to the same case, which makes the entire event feel like, well, a walking simulator. So you walk around town and talk to some people about this woman's movements last night. You find out that a random guy seemed to be staring at her from the pool table all night, so you of course talk to the pool table. Then you go to the construction site and talk to a phone. This is just what Malkavians do according to the writers. Somebody must have thought this dialogue was absolutely hilarious for this to be the biggest selling point of being a vampire detective.
the finest thick cardstock as befits my role as a harbinger of doom. You'll have to forgive me. It's a little dusty around my fundament. Oh, must you only focus on my flaws? It's hardly fair.
Leaving that aside, detectives, there is one other message. I think you should listen to it. Go ahead.
Can I spend the night tonight and for 2 weeks straight?
At this point, I'm really hankering for a joke about today's music being shit, but no such luck in that department. We figure out that the woman isn't the one being hunted, it's her twin sister who she doesn't talk to anymore. I don't care. I don't fucking care about any of this. You had an okay thing going before with the previous case, and now you've hammered away at my resolve to a point where I no longer care about this game's subplot. You head to a nightclub next.
I can't have you wandering through and breaking the immersion.
I'll be discreet.
You'll never believe what we encounter when we track down this twin. Yeah, she's fucking dead. Same way and all that. We have another sepia-tinted flashback that places Fabian in the middle of a New Year's party. We talk to another Nosferatu who sounds like this.
I know who you are. The detective. Malkavian Bloodlines sired by Gideon Hall. A dog who will never let go of a bone.
I guess the writers just didn't get the memo on how this clan usually sounds, which is ironic given that some of the best voice acting has stemmed from both of them if you ignore the body that they're attached to. You continue to mingle with these characters, meeting with Fabian's sire and a younger Sophia who both prattle on about the emergence of wireless technology, aka the radio, which replaced the telegraph. Mind you, this was supposed to be 1924 or so. The term wireless became common right at the tail end of the 1890s to describe said radio technology that was replacing telegraphs. This isn't hard to Google. We're talking 30-year-old tech by this point in time in the game. It kind of just goes to show you how invested these writers were in this game, and that carelessness spread and infected damn near all of this dialogue. Speaking of, so the finale of this segment has something happening that makes a lot of the earlier conversation and investigation insanely stupid. For context, Seattle used to have two princes that ruled its sector of the Camarilla. They were portrayed as sisters, but they weren't related by blood, just by sire. And it was at this party where one of them died, leaving Lou to rule alone. Wanna guess how she died? Yeah, the infamous vampire hunter from the very first slaying strikes again in the exact same way. So you're telling me that Fabian was investigating a case in 2024, and upon stumbling upon this very striking death scene, he went, this seems familiar, and forgot that it happened to a fucking Prince of Seattle at the very start of his life as a vampire. It would be one thing if these flashbacks were happening randomly while Fire was awake, because Fabian's mind was apparently scrambled when he died and fused with the Nomad. But this was a flashback that stemmed from another flashback. This flashback happened to the 2024 version of Fabian pre-fusion. And you know what? I'm just gonna cut to the chase now. The reason that all of this is happening this way is because another vampire keeps erasing Fabian's memory. Of course, they're just erasing his memory about who the killer is and not how these people are dying. The reality is that this entire thing is just a result of sloppy, short-sighted writing, not thinking about the implications of structuring a story this way. Because if we take it at face value, Fabian is just the worst candidate for a detective, let alone one trusted enough to be working directly under the sheriff. That's the emotion that you're going to carry with you throughout the entire game. That we're playing as a dipshit who makes snarky remarks and doesn't actually solve anything. And then the big reveal winds up with the writers trying to take that negative emotion and lend a good reason for its existence. But there's so many more issues that derive from writing Fabian this way that it isn't worth it. We never truly get any sort of redeeming qualities about this detective and how he operates. We never see him working any other case that benefits the Camarilla besides these murders. I don't know, I feel like I could have stopped analyzing this game's writing 20 minutes ago. It's just ass. But like, it's attached to a franchise and another video game that I really enjoy. So it's kind of like a train wreck that I can't help but to continue to prod at. It has a quality to it that I'm still interested in on a base level. Before I continue to chip away at my resolve, let's move over to my sponsor, ExpressVPN. You ever used the internet before? I try not to, but obtaining dead drops of YouTube videos on a flash drive sometimes goes awry and I have to give in. And when I do, I want to give as little information to any website, app, or browser as possible. I'm not kidding, I have memorized my 3 credit card numbers down to the expiration date and security code. ExpressVPN does the rest of the work for me because for some reason capitalism has allowed the ISPs of the United States to literally sell your browsing history to ad companies. And with ExpressVPN you can circumvent that since it encrypts and reroutes your network traffic through secure servers. Of course, you also have stuff like rolling bans on adult content across nearly half the states now, which is fucking absurd. So if you live in a state that claims to stand for American freedom and then bars you from using that free will, you can always change your location to one of the 105 available countries, most of which have multiple servers to choose from. If you can see the value in any of these features, feel free to find out how you can get up to 4 extra months by clicking the link in the description below, expressvpn.com/saltfactory. Thanks, guys. Waking up and heading downstairs has Tolly pulling you aside to tell you that he's gay over and over. I mean, don't get me wrong, his voice actor is fun, but he just keeps telling you that he's a gay guy instead of developing a deeper personality. I guess it's one of those things that would blend fantastically into a game where everybody else is more serious and interesting to talk to. Like, on his own, he's a great side character, but when tossed into a game where everybody else is boring, it makes his character a waste because you want him to be more than he actually is. Either way, he keeps telling you that Isabella with a Y is the next boss for you to fight. I mean, not really. He tells you that she keeps flirting dangerously close with breaking the masquerade, and now the outside of her club has a bunch of blood all over the snow, which tells me that we're fighting her. We head to the nightclub, break into the back, ghouls everywhere, TVs with brainwashing messages everywhere. Breaking them doesn't stop the noise they make, which is probably just something the devs couldn't figure out. You head further in and find a letter from Therese and Jeanette about how they cannot make it to the party, which just feels like an inclusion for the sake of including a tie to the previous game. I mean, I know other games do this kind of thing, but it kinda just feels sad now. Plus, the best part about the Vorman sisters in the previous game was that it was a twist due to how adept they were at hiding their condition. Now I guess they just both write on the same page and send the letter off to whoever. The actual confrontation with Isabella is surprisingly exceedingly well done, a shock for everybody I'm sure. It takes quite a striking set of imagery to pull me away from my disappointment at this stage, and the encounter does just that as the main dance floor is now surrounded by entranced, zombie-like humans who bob up and down. Your abilities are sapped from you as it's clear that Isabella has something to do with the mark on your hand and is trying to obtain Fire's powers somehow. You fight through the crowd before you push through to the back, these groups of humans lining your path as they creepily bob up and down. It's honestly pretty damn great. Easily the best thing that we've seen out of this game from an environmental standpoint so far. Don't get me wrong, a lot of the main buildings in Seattle are certainly striking, but between them and the swaths of alleyways that look identical, I couldn't tell you where I am in this shoebox of a map if I'm not looking at the main area like the pawn shop or hotel or whatever. So my expectations for genuine environmental intrigue were in the gutter before this, and this entire stint of game caught me off guard in the best way. Honestly, the only note that I have to improve this beyond the performance of the game when all of the bodies in a room collapse is if destroying the humans in one shot caused a trail of dismemberment and viscera to paint a room in a brutal but artsy way. I think that would have really elevated this entire experience to the next level, but we take what we can get. The actual confrontation is about the best you could hope for given the game's track record. It's confusing, with Isabella rambling on and on about her art and Fire responding in ways that don't really make sense given what she said, and vice versa.
Is our work not sublime?
It makes a statement.
A statement? Is that all your smooth mind could come up with?
Anyways, she basically relays that she's part of a group of Sabbat. To give a semi-brief summary, Sabbat are the opposite faction to the Camarilla. The Camarilla defined them as extremist, refusing to uphold the masquerade and reveling in being the inhuman monsters that they are. But the Sabbat are much more than kindred who just run around and openly show off that they are vampires. They believe in self-preservation first and foremost, creating a dog-eat-dog society that produces what they feel are the absolute best of their kind. Among the Sabbat are ranks, call signs, a hierarchy, and political factions. They're quite literally an entirely different society that the Camarilla often just refer to as the enemy of the kindred without worrying about defining the traits that might separate one Sabbat from another. And this mindset applies in the opposite way to the Sabbat when they talk about the Camarilla. The Sabbat views the Masquerade as foolish and restrictive, and go out of their way to break it whenever they decide to prod at a Cami-controlled city. But there's one more big defining trait that separates these two factions. The Sabbat believe in Cain and the antediluvians while the Camarilla do not. The Camarilla view the biblical Cain as a ghost story in the Bible that's complete fiction. The Sabbat see Cain as the first and most powerful vampire, the source of all vampires who disappeared after the Great Flood. They believe that once Cain returns, the Sabbat will be his chosen tool to destroy the antediluvians and all those who descended from them. There's so much more lore to all of this, but I would go on for a long while. Let's just put it this way. The Sabbat are zealots in the eyes of the Camarilla, and often go by the nickname of the Sword of Cain when launching their attacks on Camarilla society. All of this stuff is fascinating to read about, and the source material is one of the biggest reasons why this game doesn't come close to scratching the itch of exploring its rich histories. The fight itself is more interesting than the Benny one, ironically because I don't have my powers. Because of that, I have to focus a lot more on dodging and striking at the right moments rather than just spamming my abilities. When it's done, Fire ends Isabella and then reports back to the Prince and Tali. Choi proves to be wise beyond her years, taking Fire's warning of the Sabbat seriously, while Tali plays as the jester who scoffs and laughs at the idea of the Sabbat infiltrating the Camarilla at such a high level. Before you go back to bed though, Tali pulls Fire aside and finally points him towards a potential source of information on the mark on his hand. This leads us to the current secret keeper of Seattle named Willem. Investigating his hiding spot yields that the keeper is missing, leading us on a wild goose chase that results in us meeting yet another Nosferatu who just talks like a guy. This one is cowardly and claims that he's only doing what he was told to do before jumping on Fire and pulling him into a dreamlike state built out of Willem's immense knowledge and memory banks. Once again, there is a spark here, a flash of something good in how all of this is structured. I'd argue even more so than Isabella's encounter, because this is the first time that this game has pulled me in and made me forget about criticizing it.
Is everything all right, Willem?
Why would you even ask me something like that?
Even my heart beat once. Something troubles you, and I would know what it is.
You did say that you would be kind. Why did you have to be kind? Now I have to do what he told me.
Willem's memories reveal that he never wanted to be a vampire. He seems to have been a very savvy accountant type before being embraced. He had to leave his wife and son behind, communicating with them occasionally through phone calls before eventually abandoning them. As you walk through different memory fragments, a somber opera song plays, each memory revealing a piece of who Willem is. He watches his wife from afar, yearning to go down and talk to her one more time, even if he knows that she'll just scream when she sees his horrible affliction as a Nosferatu. He listens to news about his son going off to fight in a war, one of the world wars from the sound of it. All the while, he seems forced into this life of bookkeeping for the Camarilla before he was eventually manipulated by the Sabbat to do their bidding. Again, the actual environment built around this segment is fantastic, a real home run in the art department. Anything that can build immersion like this is truly a boon to this game. But it isn't enough to save it because the writers just didn't take the time to really build Willem into a real character. The first time that we heard of him was about 30 minutes ago, and now we're in the middle of his memories. A short conversation, some small environmental clues, and now we're diving deep into the vampire's psyche. It feels like the execution of this part of the game would have been so much more enjoyable had Willem been around since the start, had he been somebody that we got to talk to and know. All that said, with how the dialogue has went throughout the game, maybe less is more. I mean, all things considered, the person that I would care about the most at this stage if I had to choose somebody would be Sophia, just because she seems to be the closest to having a real conversational flow when talking to her. And even then, a lot of that charm seems to be from her laying it on thick and seemingly idolizing Fire. Regardless, this entire sequence is a real bright spot in this game, one that had me playing it without overthinking for the first time. Of course, it ends with, well, something baffling. Pulling yourself out of Willem's mind trap has him shocked that fire was able to resist it, and for some reason, Willem now has a dynamite vest on. I don't... This is exactly how the writers think. What's the craziest thing that we could come up with, even if it doesn't make a lot of sense? Well, the guy threatening to blow himself up comes to mind. You had fire in a trance that was long enough to toss on this vest. Why wouldn't you stake him through the heart? They literally showed that possibility happening to Benny earlier. I guess they didn't want to repeat the story? But like, the jumble of dialogue that's exchanged between these two doesn't answer anything. Willem claims that they told him to do this because the Sabbat would reunite him with his family if he does. But he's gonna fucking die if this thing goes off. Did he mean that he would reunite with them in the afterlife? What is going through his mind to make this make sense? Because he's certainly not pitching it like he can be with them at last or anything like that. And yet, if we use the clues from earlier, it sounds like his son would be very old or dead by 2024. Assuming that the words, "he's going to Europe because of the war," means what I thought they meant. I mean, I guess he could be going to Ukraine? I don't know what the fuck is going on. And I don't think the writers did either. They just included this scene for shock value as Willem blows up and fire gets launched back into Fabian's memories. There's something I've neglected to mention because it didn't seem very important until now. Every time Fabian begins to dream or remember something, he starts out in this flower field with a big tree in the center. The tree seems to babble nonsense as Fabian questions it before he begins a memory segment, and that's all there was to it until now. This time, Willem mentions that the person in charge of the Sabbat attack on Seattle is a Malkavian named the Gardener, and when Fabian sees this tree again, he calls it out as the Gardener. So, just hazarding a guess here with the pieces that we have, Fabian is the Gardener and doesn't remember. Whoever sent him to awaken fire was attempting to end him, or he was trying to use fire to his advantage. If I had to take a stab at this, I would say that the writers would have Fabian's personality split between his detective side and the Gardener for this scenario just because, well, that's what happened with the primary Malkavian contact in Bloodlines 1. On top of this, some second-in-command is likely pulling the strings now and trying to reawaken Fabian/the Gardener by guiding him through the things that are familiar to him so that his memories are jostled. All the while, fire is getting stronger, making for a stronger vessel when Fabian takes over. All of these ideas reek of Tremere magic and treachery, and we know only two of those currently, Sophia and the old lady who you can bone at the cafe.
Young people call this edging.
Yeah, it's probably the old lady. This next stint of memory has us investigating yet another murder. This time it's the guy who used to live in the apartment that fire is now holed up in. This entire thing sucks ass, man. Like, I'm generally intrigued by what's going on here, but this gameplay is 100% done by TCR. Because I walk all the way from the tower to the apartments, I find some random elixir that enhances memory and walk over to the cafe. I ask the old lady there and she tells me what it's about before pointing me back to Sophia, who's at the tower that I started at. I ask her what's up and she points us towards a smattering of leads that are the furthest possible away from the tower that they could be. I head back across town and talk to the pawn shop guy who has no idea about the potion, but at least points out that the crosses being left at these scenes are recently manufactured to look older than they are. Then I head to Katsumi, who has no idea about anything. Then I head to Tali, who withholds information intentionally so that we have a reason to use our vampire powers. We find out that Willem was the one who needs the memory potions and head over to him. Like, the base level of intrigue is fine, but I'm just being drip-fed this information one person at a time with nothing interesting to do between with these long walks. The city isn't interesting enough to enjoy walking through it for the 1000th time, and there's obviously no combat or the like to break up the monotony of moving from one end to the other. You get to Willem and he's like, well, it wasn't me, but yes, I do use the memory potions to help with bookkeeping. Fascinating. Of course, something that he says reminds Fabian of the 1920s again, so we go off to Sepia Land. Man, I can't believe the world wasn't in color until like the 60s or so. So back in another case of somebody died via headlessness and rebar, this time Willem is the one who was at the scene. Of course, he hasn't turned into a Nosferatu yet, so that's fun. The one who was killed was the guy who we talked to at the party, and Willem was to be his replacement. He shed some light on the fact that he decided to become a vampire so that he could support his family through the Great Depression, which is a nice touch to his story. Willem had just gotten through being embraced by the Nosferatu when the killer broke in. He couldn't make out the features of the killer in the dark room, but he was wearing a hat that looks like Fabian's hat and was taller or shorter than Fabian, whatever the fuck that means. The monkey wrench thrown into the mix was that the killer was breathing, which would indicate that he's not a vampire. Although, that said, apparently the killer also staked the Nosferatu through the back before ripping his head off with his bare hands, so we're getting conflicting ideas here. Regardless, Fire wakes back up, replenished in Prince Choi's tower, facing the prince who has questions. At this point, Sophia is all pissed off that Willem died this way, stating that he was her closest friend and all that. I don't believe her, but the writers are going the extra mile to sell this plot, so I can at least appreciate her sudden outburst here. Of course, Sophia recovers from her anger fast, now adopting a pet name for Fire as she calls him her love a couple of times while implying that some old forbidden tomes in Lou's private collection may have the answers that we seek about Fire's mark. Gotta say, definitely a good move making this lady one of the most conventionally attractive ones in the game. She's just too purposefully inconspicuous to be clean in all of this. So we head to Lou and ask for the books, and she's like, yeah, alright, and then just tells you where they are. There's probably a catch, but I don't care. I do have to say the idea of forbidden books does align with the tabletop lore rather well, as the Camarilla historically controls, destroys, and hoards knowledge about Cain in order to better enforce the Masquerade. So that was another nice touch. For all of my bitching, there is intrigue throughout this game. It just comes erratically and usually relates directly to the tabletop game's lore. I mean, for all intents and purposes, there are several things that I brought up in the past minute or two that have been intriguing. The problem is that I'm cutting out about, 1 to 2 hours of gameplay. So, it's just not enough. At this point, everybody and their mother directs you towards suspecting Lou as being the big bad, or at least being involved with the Sabbat. There's the fact that she let you have access to this forbidden knowledge so quickly. You have Lou becoming snippy with Fire and calling him a friend of the Anarchs despite never siding with them. You have Fabian telling Fire to watch his back with Lou. You have ghouls and thin bloods ambushing you at the sight of the books. You have Fabian trying to connect the dots between them and Lou. You have Sophia telling you that Lou might be commanding the current prince to have Fire taken out in some way. It's too obvious for my tastes, and I'm guessing that Sophia is redirecting Fire in a way that will have him weaponized against Seattle's Camarilla. We head to Katsumi from here, who sends us to the bar, which sends us to a porta potty with a lady who has information about what Isabella was involved in. The difference between this runaround is that I can scale buildings and fight enemies and use movement skills and generally make my own fun. And I think that TCR wasn't really aware of how that contrast would play out between the Fabian and Fire info gathering sections. Also, at this stage in the game, I gotta comment on how the puzzles are structured, as in they aren't really. There isn't a lot of thinking in this game, and you would think that something that was more walking sim oriented would fall back on that kind of concept for entertainment purposes. Instead, nearly every puzzle is using Fire's telekinesis to pull things around. Coffin lids, vent lids, levers, porta potty lids. It's especially weird when these are all things that you can just pull open with your hands if you're as strong as a vampire. It's just lazy design, and it's something that's only gotten more grating as time has gone on. Our last stop for now is to visit Tolly, who treats Fire like shit and sees him as the reason for Seattle's resident secret keeper dying. Again, this sudden hostility without giving Fire a real chance to explain what happened seems just like a red herring. But I also think this is actually a pretty decent depiction of just how the Camarilla operates and how quick they are to blame people when shit goes awry. That kind of thing happened quite a bit in the original Bloodlines too, so I can't fault the direction here. Tolly's task has you heading to the police station and finding Benny's old office so that we can at least recoup some kind of semblance of secret information that was separate from Willem's now exploded memory banks. The whole thing is a gimmick segment where you have to stealth past cops, find the key to Fabian's old office, and then use the vents to get up to Benny's room. Thankfully, you can just walk out after this, which on one hand is stupid because nobody questions it, but on the other hand, at least I don't have to worry about failing. Heading back to the apartment for some rest has Fabian and Fire going over the night's events. None of it is particularly enthralling besides one chunk: Sophia acting suspicious with her request for forbidden tomes. Here's the thing, I may have picked up on this sooner than the writers let on, but if somebody hasn't, then Fire's questioning of Sophia's motives does put it on the player's radar at the very least. The question is, what's the purpose of this? To get ahead of the player's intuition? To paint Fire as an experienced elder who is wary of those who try to buddy up to him? Both could be true, I suppose, but I also wonder if it's insecurity. The insecurity that the writer's plot twist isn't good enough to stand on its own. By having Fire point out Sophia's behavior, it reinforces the idea that the writers are in on a player's perception of this twist occurring, that they led the player to this twist intentionally. It absolves them from the idea that they wrote a weak twist and instead makes it seem like they're better at writing this sort of thing than they are. I feel like this is the closest to the answer out of all of the options, as Fabian immediately goes, "Who, Sophia? No, she's way too soft to do something like this." Our Malkavian detective has been a woefully unreliable narrator for this entire game, and the writers having him push against Fire's suspicions after having him raise them only cements this twist and foretells it outright. Back into the memory dive. This time the guy who died was nobody important, aka a run-of-the-mill human who was placed just outside of Benny's safe haven. The only clue points towards a pregnant woman who keeps showing up like a ghost before wiping people's memories. This has gone on to affect all sorts of people who Fabian has associated with and has drank from throughout these memory sequences. After quizzing them for more details, we eventually track down this pregnant woman, a Malkavian vampire. Now this is the sauce that I want to see more of out of this game, because it's a super interesting scenario, right? What happens when a pregnant woman gets embraced? Well, usually the pregnancy terminates right then and there. But very rarely the fetus lives on as a tiny, immortal vampire forever attached to their mother. At least, theoretically forever attached. That's a really fun thought experiment, and I love the inclusion of it here. The woman, named Misty, is a textbook example of a Malkavian, not some quippy Reddit-born detective who makes light of everything, somebody who is instead genuinely mentally troubled and consistently feels sorrow for those with problems. Talking to Misty yields another 1920s flashback, where it becomes clear that Misty was attacked by the rebar killer after he killed the sheriff at the time. It's here that Misty reveals that she became pregnant by Campbell, which seems impossible since he's a vampire. Campbell told her to get rid of it, she didn't want to, and here she is now bleeding out on the floor.
When I found Hector, he told me I had to get out of Dodge.
I think this is one of the things that has been bothering me about this game's dialogue, but I couldn't quite figure out why. There are some characters that continued to embrace the 1920s speaking style even in the modern day, Fabian included, and that kind of made sense to me. It also made sense that some characters would speak in a more modern way despite being somebody who lived through a previous time, vampires who have just adapted to the times. But every here and there, wires would get crossed and a character who you meet in the modern day would show up in the 1920s and speak exactly as they do in the present, with phrases that you wouldn't hear in those older times. Yes, the legend of Dodge City, Kansas was around in the early 1900s, but it didn't become a common phrase until the 1950s when Gunsmoke began hitting the radio airwaves. It's not impossible for Misty here to use this phrase, but it sticks out as careless, the kind of carelessness that spreads to the rest of the game's dialogue. Regardless, it's revealed that Campbell was still only a ghoul at this time and could still have children. To clarify that process, ghouls are created when a vampire gives up some of their blood to them, creating humans who are a little more powerful than usual. The aging process halts, wounds regenerate faster, senses are heightened. It's all temporary, and the process creates a supernatural loyalty that allows ghouls to be used like pawns by vampires. If this occasional process halts, a ghoul will lose their powers and their body will rapidly catch up to their true age, sometimes fatally. Either way, as Misty laid dying on the floor, Fabian embraced her to save her, becoming her sire. You're never gonna believe this, but we wake up as Fire after this. I know, it's crazy how different this game gets. So we meet with Choi and she wants us to actually start looking into the Sabbat now that they've done something provably linked to them. Well, besides the ring with their symbol that Benny had and the fact that Isabella literally said that she was working for them. This takes us to a new part of Seattle, the Underground. Apparently this is where Lou has historically banished undesirable ghouls and kindred to when they've pissed her off. And she just now sent Nyx here. I know what you're asking me, who the fuck is Nyx? It's that gangrel servant from before. I didn't think she'd be remotely important, but here we are. Anyways, Nyx got punished for whatever reason and was sent to meet Fire here, but instead ran ahead. While we follow her trail, Fabian just starts laying into her for being a gangrel. Again, there's no real nuance between these clans. The writers like to pretend like they've created personalities within their characters based off of them, but it's all surface level. So Fabian doesn't show any kind of empathy towards Nyx's plight of being sentenced to existing underground. He just calls her a mutt over and over again because she's a gangrel. That's not very Malkavian of him. Anyways, Nyx is dead. Yeah, so much for whipping that name out there. Whatever killed her is definitely more beast than man, and it was what we were sent to look for by Choi apparently. I don't know, this plot point is as weird as always because Choi literally goes, "Hey, since the Sabbat just killed our secret keeper, I'm expediting your investigation into your mark and its relationship to them." And apparently that means hunting monsters in the underground that have been killing off tourists. The thing is, I get what the writers were going for here because the monsters wind up being shovelhead Sabbats. Well, okay, hang on. So back in the earlier editions of Vampire the Masquerade, shovelheads were shock troopers that were created by a kindred siring somebody and then knocking them out with a shovel before they could get their bearings. They were then buried in a mass grave with other shovelheads, and the ensuing confusion would cause them to go nuts, clawing their way to the surface and becoming mindless beasts. This was kind of thrown out the window by the 5th edition for whatever reason. I always thought that the barbaric lack of eloquence to this method was kind of a fun and brutal ritual that encompasses the Sabbats perfectly. But now we have the Unbirthed, which are essentially the same type of monster but are born via performing a necromantic ritual over a mass grave. It's a lot more boring, but whatever. The threat of the Unbirthed is at least strong enough to feel important for Fire to take them out. Their ferocity is unmatched by any enemy in the game so far, and the entire level feels like it definitely took a page out of the design seen in the sewer segments of Bloodlines 1. To further send these events off the rails, members of the Second Inquisition drop in, a movement of vampire hunters who have organized to, hunt vampires. It's chaotic enough to be genuinely fun, and I did have a good time with this part of the game. It does feel like it all comes a bit out of nowhere though. Like, it would have been nice to have encountered one or two of the Unbirthed or the Inquisition ahead of time to at least plant their existence into the player's mind. But at this point we gotta just roll with it as everything happens at once, including Fire discovering the existence of some crazy secret Sabbat door that's buried by rubble before he can get to it. Yeah, we've hit the and then this happens part of the writing, but at least something is happening, I guess. We head back to Lou and we go, "Hey yo Lou, we gotta get to the underground." And she's like, "Yeah, alright, sure, yeah, take the elevator." The elevator leads to an underground pit that conveniently places us on the other side of the door that was blocked off before. Now for all of the setup of convenience that we just bore the brunt of, this is a genuine, bona fide level. The first in this game that truly feels like it was designed with exploration and bursts of tense combat in mind. Like, this is the first time in this entire game where I felt like I was playing a fucking video game that was designed from the ground up to be fun. Like, don't get me wrong, I had fun with the combat before, but it always took place in some back alley or rooftop that I then departed from right after a single fight. This is, well, it's a level. It has layers and layers of design, encounters that are tense and life-threatening, gaps where you can choose to climb fast or wade through slowly. It's something that this game was missing that I didn't even consider until now. And it made me go, oh yeah, this is like the mansion or the sewers or the museum or the temple or the countless other locations that were built to actually be video game levels in the first game. Don't get me wrong, Bloodlines 1 had its share of shitty level designs that made parts of the game feel like an afterthought. If we're gonna get into the rose-tinted days of yore and pine after some immaculate design, the first game is very hit or miss with its layouts. But there were also some very solid and well-constructed stages that felt very good to traverse. And this part of the second game reminds me of those bits. It's kind of a punch to the face at this point, as I realize that even if the plot of this game was ass, it could have still been a genuinely fun game through and through had there been more locations like this. So you build up this suspense with the hunters infiltrating the underground area, which is already built off of the intrigue of the real-world Seattle Underground, a historical network of old buildings that were buried and built over back in the early 1900s. You've created a very nice level with good combat. What do you do after you get to the location of the gardener? You have the player go through a little puzzle to summon him. It makes sense. I mean, this whole experience has been a fantastic vibe so far. We should definitely end it on a high note.
This is old school mobster work. Or I guess horror movie black magic? Nikki. Would it help if we found the fingers?
A spit of solace for the heart.
You have weird tastes, fella. I'm guessing we only need one more. Unless this hand belongs to my cousin Jethro.
Jesus fucking Christ, you just couldn't help yourself and show a little restraint, could you? So the gardener is, well, mental. And I was definitely wrong about the twist here, but I feel like it wasn't a terrible guess. It's also worth saying this now, this game does have some pretty outstanding visuals when it puts in the effort. And everything visually in this scene is fantastic, from the familiar orange hues of the sunset-dappled field to the gardener himself, a blood-drenched pale white load highly reminiscent of Baron Harkonnen. I gotta think there was some inspiration taken here. The resemblance is close enough for me to expect the guy to tell me about his nephew Fade Rotha. Either way, though the jumble that spills out of the gardener is certified nonsense, it's actually not entirely unwelcome. It's some of the better Malkavian writing that we've gotten in that regard. From what I can tell, this is somebody that Lou Graham rejected in some kind of way.
Why, with her love, she quite transfixed me. Her word, cold iron through my heart. This is the garden she built.
And because of that, the gardener went on to initiate this plot against Lou and Seattle's Camarilla. Fire points out that Lou is the one who locked the gardener away here, which is something that I did not understand from him at all, but whatever, thanks for the help, I guess. The end goal is for the gardener to get Fire to drink him down like a Slurpee, completing the ritual that was initiated upon branding our protagonist. It's hard to fault the Malkavian for thinking that this plan would work out given his mental state, but he hardly makes a compelling argument as Fire refuses and kills the gardener without so much as an ounce of resistance. It overall isn't a bad scene, but I think that Fabian's quips before this kinda just killed the momentum for me. Plus, it's clear that the guy couldn't have accomplished all of this by himself, so I'm waiting for the true villain to show up and explain. Busting out of the underground has us fighting our way back through the Inquisition, making up for a lack of boss fight with the gardener. Honestly, these soldiers have been the most fun that I've had with the game so far because it genuinely feels like I'm a monster hunting down humans. With ghouls, they always kind of dodge away with superhuman reflexes and fight back in a more predictable manner. These Inquisition members are deadly at range, but go down very easily in a fistfight, which feels a lot more fun when it comes to approaching them like a predator approaches prey. As we near the end of the game, the same issues that have plagued it throughout continue to chip away at every conversation. In this case, Lou, Choi, and Sophia all meet at the top of the hotel debating on what to do. Lou is being horrible as always, claiming that Fire should kill off the head of the Inquisition unit in Seattle and then turn on the anarchs who were threatening to break the masquerade. Sophia would rather we kill off the Inquisition and leave the anarchs be, I think. And Choi thinks that we should turn the Inquisition's attention on the anarchs. It's once again a very strangely paced conversation with weird bursts of dialogue that don't quite make sense with where they're being placed.
Why, darling, I'm talking about symbols. Stalin, Mussolini, Hitler.
The Thin Bloods will be hit first and hardest.
Good riddance.
After them, the Nosferatu. Anyone with a tell.
Time they return to their sewers.
Don't let them do this. Please, my love.
Is there a reason you brought your little pet, dear?
From here, Lou seems especially grateful to Fire for killing off the gardener and approaches him in a borderline sexual way once the other two leave.
All thanks to you. my hero. But you're troubled, child. Come, rest your head. Tell Mama Lou what burdens you.
I am beyond you in years and in strength.
Fire treads the horseshoe from Hyper Virgin Supreme to stone-faced Chad in a way that you can only really laugh at. Like, he's not ignorant to the idea of roleplay and being treated like a lesser being in the bedroom. The La Sombra vampire in him got a whole thing going on where she chokes him out.
I only wish to serve.
It just felt like this could have been an opportunity where we choose to thoroughly ingratiate ourselves with Lou and formally become her ally and servant, but Fire backs off and makes that decision for you before you can blink. Either way, we fuck off to the apartment and have another dream that reveals that the gardener was Fabian's sire. It's so weird because this could have really been a grand reveal that made everything make sense, that caused you to see the story in a new light, but the writers just couldn't wait, couldn't keep the player on hold for the last couple of hours of the game, couldn't come up with a twist that was worth stringing the player along. And this is, unfortunately, where the writers spill their hand. So this entire game you have Lou being this horrible, manipulative, power-hungry woman operating Seattle from the shadows. Her attitude is haughty and self-indulgent, her reach is extensive, the way that she talks to others is belittling. She's the person that you would most suspect throughout the game. And the other people in the game are repeatedly telling you, hey, keep an eye on Lou. The twist is, there is no twist. Lou's the enemy of this game, or at least an enemy of this game. Fabian's a shit detective, and the person who solves this mystery is his sire, Gideon. Gideon realizes in this conversation that the person who must be having all of these vampires killed off is Lou, and he goes to confront her, which causes her to seal him away in the underground so that he can suffer and go insane. It's simultaneously an interesting plot point, and yet the lack of a twist is a letdown. Yes, I enjoyed the idea of Gideon the Malkavian going insane and initiating this plot to get back at Lou by using his powers to invade dreams, but the end result has Lou being the person that she's literally always presented herself as, with no real reasoning behind her actions besides good old Ventrue power grabbing. But we'll circle back to this when this plot unfolds fully. So before we get to the Lou plot stuff, we gotta take out the Inquisition, which follows the first game's plot in terms of big event planning. Choi wants us to destroy the intel in their Seattle office, Lou wants us to kill their leader.
Ironic, right? City of coffee and it does nothing for us at all. Hope you're feeling hungry with a side order of homicidal, cause you got a dinner date with some tasty, tasty hunters. You know Silky's bar? Go down the alley opposite. Bingo, Castle Fuckenstein. I know Lou wants their mother hen pulped, but that'll put the shit among the pigeons. If you meet her, be careful. We don't want them pissed enough to bring in a whole flock of mother cluckers. This is important, Fire. The IAO are not a joke.
You ever watch a movie or play a game where you're actively realizing that the writers are sabotaging any real plot by inserting jokes constantly? This is like the epitome of that. How do you write this guy to be a snarky, light-hearted comedian with non-stop jokes and then have him deliver joke after joke only to cap it off with him saying, "This isn't a joke"? Isn't there a point where somebody hears that dialogue playback and go, "Oh wait, maybe we should have Tali joke around less during this"? Or, maybe we should have somebody else give Fire this objective? The attack on the Inquisition stronghold is once again a very fun experience due to how the layout of the level is structured. This time I didn't bother going super stealthy and just wrecked the place, which was fun in its own way. I did notice something about one of my passive skills that I unlocked though. Basically one of the clan passives is that you don't take damage during feeding, which is huge. But it literally means when you're feeding. Because as soon as you stop and begin to perform your uninterruptible kill animation, you can be hurt again while it's playing out, which is fucking stupid. Especially when I get bad RNG and it performs the one where I smash their head. It takes forever to do that, but when it does happen, I get lit up with gunfire. It's really goddamn stupid. It feels silly to complain about it now, but it hadn't been a real issue until this stage of the game. So this Agent Baker is the head of this unit of IAO that's settled in Seattle and has begun its assault on the Kindred here. I wasn't gonna get into all of this, but the Information Awareness Office is one of the United States' 3 main factions of vampire hunters. The US, along with the UK, Russia, Brazil, and the Vatican, all make up the main forces of the so-called coalition, that in turn leads the Second Inquisition. The vampire hunters that we faced in Bloodlines 1 were a part of the Society of Leopold, a Vatican force whose tactics are much different than the IAO's. This backing lore hardly has any impact on Bloodlines 2, but I guess I wanted to point out the missed opportunity to expand on these ideas and include them in a more organic and in-depth way. As things stand, a lot of this game's ideas are just that, ideas that are slapped on the game almost willy-nilly. Here's the IAO, they're just US military types. Here are the Unbirthed, they're just monsters. Shit like that. You could have had whole scenes depicting the organization of the IAO, how they operate, what they stand for, what their flaws are, their strengths, what drives them. The IAO is the main point of financial contact for the entire coalition, filtering billions of US government dollars into worldwide operations against the Kindred. Their power stems from an algorithm that's illegal on paper, but it's still obviously used because when has that ever stopped any government? The algorithm that they use pinpoints suspected vampires by tracking their metadata and honing in on habits such as phone activity only happening at nighttime or a lack of food purchases at supermarkets or the like. I mean, you have an entire boon of highly interesting and unique scenarios that could stem from how the Camarilla has to operate in the modern age. Food purchases that are performed in the day by ghouls using a vampire's credit card, leaving your phone playing YouTube videos throughout the daytime, or having your GPS signal showing that you moved into an office building where you sleep in order to fake having a corporate job. The IAO has been dubbed the Digital Vampire Hunter, and has gotten so powerful that it's caused many vampires to resort to Cold War tactics of leaving notes in dead drops and retreating from technology entirely. And this relationship between the IAO and the Camarilla should 100% have been a point of exploration in this game's storytelling, but it really isn't. What we instead get are glass cannon soldiers that follow a special forces stereotype and some random papers that vaguely touch on how the IAO shuffles information around to keep the real events away from the public and prevent mass panic. The real problem with the writing is that the writers didn't want to go the extra mile to make these inclusions shine. Yes, the IAO is here, but they show up in the late game as an enemy type and not a tangible, real threat to the Camarilla here. You could argue that this is why Sophia and Choi were so concerned about their appearance, but how is a random player who has no idea about the IAO supposed to glean that from this conversation? I mean, this is one of the things that you could explain to Fire and he would have no clue about because he went to sleep in like 1924. To somebody who hasn't played or looked up the tabletop game's rules, this is just some random pack of bad guys and they have to take these reactions at face value. There's no real effort to impart just how powerful the IAO is onto the player. You could say that this is the reason why the old lady at the cafe has you picking up and delivering packages and notes to people, but there's no care to actually stress the importance of dead drops to the Camarilla. It's just a side quest, just like the IAO are just enemies. I don't think the developers actually cared about Vampire the Masquerade when they made Bloodlines 2. They just peppered it with terms and factions and then wrote a half-hearted story to fill in the blanks. And Baker is really the epitome of this lack of care, because the way that she engages with and talks at Fire is as if she's part of an organization that has the capability of absolutely demolishing Seattle's Camarilla. She scoffs at his attempt to get to her. She taunts him with information that she has on Seattle's Kindred. She throws troops at him and then beckons him further in as if he's not really a threat. If I were somebody with zero knowledge about the IAO, I'd look at this dialogue as absolute trash, the epitome of writers who fall back on the overconfident villain trope. But knowing what I know about the organization, it makes sense to me why she would be this confident. And that's not good writing. Referring to background lore so that players with tabletop knowledge understand it is great for little Easter eggs and tidbits that don't really affect the main plot of the game. But when you're writing for a general audience who may have never associated with the franchise, you need to take the time to catch them up a little bit if you're gonna write an entire character who embodies such a prolific organization. Otherwise, you're just making inside jokes to a fraction of your audience and leaving everybody else behind. And eventually you'll make an inside joke that doesn't make sense because you don't actually care about the source material. Baker is dying with weeks to live, and she wants Fire to turn her into a vampire so that she can survive. Her end of the deal would involve giving Fire information that she's gathered under the IAO while steering her people to overlook the Camarilla here and turn on the Anarchs instead. What the fuck? On one hand, information on the IAO is limited to a handful of pages in the 5th edition tabletop rules. On the other hand, that limited information paints the picture of a vast network of powerful fanatics who would sooner let an ally perish than allow a vampire to live. So that's the information that I would go with, unless you really take the time to paint Baker as a flawed and selfish human, one that is heavily involved in the plot at multiple points. But she isn't, is she? No, she's the leader of this group of hunters and is now asking you to embrace her so that she'll live through her cancer. Why would we ever do that? Why would we trust that somebody with the blood of an elder transferred into her couldn't become a very powerful foe later on? Well, because this is the plot that was spelled out ahead of time. Choi wanted you to turn the IAO against the Anarchs specifically. There are a billion ways to potentially do that, and yet the answer that the writers came up with is this half-baked, immersion-breaking, lore-destroying pile of off-the-cuff trash that a 5th grader with no respect for the lore could have invented if they thought hard enough. Honestly, fuck this game. I'm being railroaded into a decision where this smart elder who questions everything now chooses between killing this dumbass like he should, or embracing her like the Prince of Seattle's Camarilla wants him to do. Like, honest to God, you know that Choi isn't going to go, wow, what the fuck, Fire, why would you do that? She's gonna love this and see it as a business-forward result. Every single part of this conversation is bullshit, down to the part where Fire asks for proof of the Anarchs making a move against the Camarilla or whatever, and the game flashes to a still picture of Katsumi meeting with somebody in the shadows.
Seemed to be making a trade, but I could only get a visual.
That's Katsumi. But who's her paramour?
Holy shit, what a video. Good enough for me, let's eviscerate this group of vampires who I absolutely have zero attachment to because the game has only shat out 3 separate encounters with the leader of them. I choose to embrace dumbass here, and Fire's like, you know, it would be ironic if an ex-vampire hunter was turned into a vampire. Holy shit, it's the reasoning of the century. This game is breaking the boundaries of writing.
You just embraced someone without the prince's permission. Can't imagine Blue would be best pleased either. If I were you, I'd say as little as possible.
Right, like she's gonna do anything about my disobedience, like she's gonna command that Fire dies and attack him outright or banish him from the city.
Come on, Fire. You got a bad poker face.
I did not kill Agent Baker. I embraced her.
What?
In the right hands, the IAO can be a tool. So, I grasped it by the handle.
So you listened.
This is the problem with boring writing. You know that nothing absurd is going to happen because the writers have shown that they have their one single-track outcome in mind throughout the game. There are no consequences whatsoever in this game for rebelling against specific characters. Hell, the writers tipped their hand when you took Benny with you and the Anarchs went, wow, I wish you hadn't done that. Anyways, meet me at the bar. So Fire heads back to bed, but Sophia catches him on the way out. Here's the thing, you've already shown the player multiple times the connection that Sophia had to Gideon before he became the gardener. This is information that Fire knows and understands due to witnessing events in Fabian's dreams. So when Sophia approaches Fire and says, hey, so you still have that mark on your hand, which means that the gardener wasn't the one who inflicted it. This is her playing the good guy still if she's the one who sought to bind Fire to her cause of killing off Lou and the Camarilla. Or it's her proclaiming her innocence by continuing to work towards the idea that she's helping Fire to get rid of this mark. And the latter option would mean that Fire should tell Sophia, hey, by the way, the gardener was Gideon, a close friend of yours from the past. But he doesn't even mention it. He just lets her blather on about trying to figure out how to get rid of this mark before the conversation turns to who Fire suspects of inflicting it. Now, I will say that the option eventually does come up to accuse Sophia of creating the mark, and I have to give the writers a little credit there for not making this whole ordeal as obvious by treating her as a potential suspect also. But the response from her is just,
You're serious? You're really serious?
It seems unlikely, but we must entertain all options.
Come on, dude, there's no follow-up, no stomping away by Sophia, no refusal to work with fire due to his accusation. Why even include the option if this is what we get out of it? It's like the bare minimum effort. But then you get this option to try to talk Sophia up, claim that you want to spend the night with her, and she goes,
With me? And you think I am a traitor? No, I'm sorry.
And I'm like, whoa, hang on. I reload the game, make sure not to suspect her this time, and...
With me? I'm flattered, but I have work to do.
God, it's actually funny at this point. It's like the writers build every opportunity for themselves to create unique conversations with fun outcomes, and then they just kneecap themselves on the spot. Imagine an outcome where you pilot fire into sleeping with Sophia and falling in love with her, leading to true betrayal by her, or even an ending where you're on board with her and are willing to go along with her plan. Hell, there's a ton of nuance in an idea like that just inherently because, well, did fire truly fall in love with Sophia, or did the spell on his hand work its magic and bind him to his captor? Instead, the writers basically changed this one line of dialogue and give you your telltale "Sophia loved that" feel-good indicator in the top right of the screen. Going to sleep again has Fabian finally getting to the end of the road with this whole rebar killer ordeal. Well, after doing a bunch of grunt work for Tali. Yeah, I don't know why the quest designers would kick this entire thing off with Sophia and Fabian having this conversation that leads to the player seeking out the answer to one of the game's greatest mysteries, only to stonewall them and force them to go speak with these less interesting characters that the writers never sunk any effort into. But you kind of get used to the game beating you down and making you talk to objects over and over by now. Once you do all that, Fabian discovers with certainty evidence of Lou sealing Gideon away, and goes to report it to Campbell, who was still Prince at the time. Of course, Campbell is in on it too, and this is actually one of the better written plot points. Because even if you realize that the old 1920s killer had to be mortal, and that Campbell was obviously a ghoul who could still walk in the daylight back at the time, there was always this assumption that Campbell was a decent guy who got killed right at the start of the game, presumably by Lou. So yeah, this was a good scene for once. One that leads into another flashback that has Fabian solving this mystery back in the 1920s also, only to have his mind wiped by Lou's Ventru powers. It's a very Prince LaCroix inspired plotline, but it's honestly the best thing that we've gotten out of this game so far. The end of the game nears with some decisions that impact the ending. First off, you meet with Baker and tell her what to do with the IAO. Options include directing them at the Anarchs, at Lou, at Choi, or just out of Seattle entirely. I don't care about the Anarchs, and Lou has this shit coming, but I just told them to get out of Seattle. Once again, the inference of how powerful the IAO is there, but there's no real demonstration of their power.
I should report back to Ryong.
I should think so, seeing as you likely saved not only her hide, but the hide of every kindred in this city.
At last, Baltimore is saved. Honestly though, this game is unintentionally hilarious by the end of it. There are just gunfights happening on rooftops across the city non-stop, and the people below are walking around like normal, either homeless or looking for sex work. Immersion is not a high priority, to say the least.
The IAO poses no further threat.
That easy? But I trust you. Seems your judgment paid off. The child can live. Our burden seems lightened. Good work.
What a natural conversation. This is like the Sopranos of video games. The second task is getting Lou another person to eat. Yeah, like, I get what the devs were going for with this sort of tour between the powers that be here, letting you place down the gauntlet or whatever the fuck. But why do I care about this? Answer, I don't. And there's no real way to tell Lou to fuck off and die or anything along those lines, we just have to perform her task. So we move to Sophia at last, who leaves us a recording indicating that she has the answers to our hand mark and that we're to meet her at the conservatory. We walk off to the trap, find a neat trail of her blood, and begin wading through the unbirthed and Sabbat that litter the area. The entire way Fabian is like, "Oh man, they got her, oh geez, I hope she's okay." And then when you get to the end, well, she's dead. Huh. Part of me is a bit shocked by this and part of me is impressed, and I'm trying to figure out why. Because on one hand, I sat here this entire time going, oh yeah, I've figured out what's going on here. Looking at the facts again, Sophia is a Tremere, a clan known for its treachery. Every other clan has held to their stereotypes besides the Nosferatu. Lou's a Ventru who craves control, Fabian and Gideon are crazy Malkavians. All of your contacts around the city hold true to what their clans typically embody. Sophia was the one who stood out as too innocent, too helpful. Now, it's very possible that this is a fake out, that her body was drained dry into some other more powerful vessel. Because I mean, if we're to believe that the Sabbat did this and she wasn't a part of it, then Sophia lured us to a conservatory instead of directing us there without going there herself, and then conveniently got kidnapped and killed. And that's the end of this level. And you're telling me that the entire purpose for this was for you to find her dead? There was no other revelation beyond the fact that Fire realizes that he was initially tortured here in his torpor before he was boxed up again. And that's hardly a fact that's interesting enough to warrant this entire bit of story, even when paired with Sophia's death. So let's put it this way. If I didn't suspect Sophia, then this entire outcome is stupid and clearly meant to tug on a player's heartstrings if they're invested in Sophia as a love interest. The problem with that is that you didn't spend nearly enough time or truly meaningful moments with the Tremere to warrant truly caring for her. There wasn't enough build-up or touching moments with her beyond her continuing to call Fire her love over and over again. But I did suspect Sophia, and that made this moment more powerful because she appears to be dead after all of that suspicion. The question is, did the writers intentionally lead a player to suspect her and then try to hit them with this twist in order to throw them off? Well, let's explore that. Say that she's truly dead, and there is no double twist here. In that case, all of the dialogue and writing revolving around her was inserted specifically to get the player to suspect her for no reason. She was a red herring who stuck out as overeager, too nice, and clearly had a motive given the past flashbacks in Fabian's mind. She fits perfectly as the final puzzle piece, but wasn't because the writers wanted to artificially insert a twist. And that would make this entire spat of writing terrible and irredeemable just due to the fact that there truly was no optional romantic connection to her beyond her insisting on giving Fire a pet name. But if Sophia's alive, and in some other body the way that Fabian is alive and in Fire's body, well, that's the only thing that makes sense given what we've seen throughout this game. In a way, it's the logical conclusion. Does that make this part of the game's writing bad? Honestly, no, I don't think so. I think that all of the pieces were given to the player over the course of the game, and even if I guessed at this conclusion a little early, it's not a terrible plot point. But now we're getting into what could have made it better, right? What could have made this plot point truly shine? There are probably a dozen additions that would have made it a little bit better, but if I had to include just one thing, it would be a true emotional connection. If I have this right, then Sophia is the one trying to control Fire for a plethora of reasons that I've already spelled out. Some of the connection to her does hinge on Fire being allowed to see her as somebody worthy of romancing. But the one or two times that he is allowed to express interest by the writers result in Sophia giggling and telling him that she has work to do. Why wouldn't the devs take the time to actually flesh out this potential relationship, have her hook her claws into him, stick with him like a partner in crime? I honestly think that the devs didn't have that kind of nuance in them and that this was the best they could do given the general plot. It's not bad, but it is short of great. So you get back from that event and Lou finally makes her move to become Prince of the City once again. And of course, her first decree is for you to bring her Katsumi's head or she'll command the Camarilla to hunt down every single Anarch in the city.
Lou, the Anarchs aren't all—
Child, the Anarchs are nothing but the Sabbat in a new skin.
She leads your Sabbat. Her Anarchs must be exterminated.
Look at me. Are you sure it was Nines Rodriguez? Because if it was, the consequences— do you know where this might lead? Do you really have any idea? Under most circumstances, I would call a blood hunt on the murderer immediately. However, the anarchs of this city may interpret such an action to be a declaration of war. I do not want a war with them.
Do you not see the subtleties that were trampled on, mowed over, and ruined between these games? The intricacies of the relationship between the Anarchs and the Camarilla? And you could argue that Seattle's Camarilla is just that much more powerful than LA's. Hell, you could come up with 1,000 reasons why Lou would outright command her forces to kill off the Anarch leader when compared to LaCroix's posturing, song, and dance. But the difference between these two setups are at the writer's discretion. LA was an outlier with the Camarilla, a place that had been more or less abandoned by the faction until LaCroix bought his way in as a young and unproven prince. He felt that it was his duty to tame the wild city and bring order to chaos. That's a really fucking interesting setup for a video game. So now you have Bloodlines 2, which takes place in a city that follows a much more conventional power structure for the Camarilla. And that's fine, but by creating a setting where the Anarchs don't really have much power, where they're more of a beaten down entity who are easily overpowered by the Camis, I mean, how are you going to make that relationship interesting? And I don't think the devs asked themselves that question when they made this game. Let's think this through. What made Prince LaCroix in the first game so compelling as a bad guy? In a few words, he was ambitious, clever, manipulative, and deceitful beyond belief. Lou displays shades of that in her character, but her being a part of a Camarilla-dominant city has caused her to be much more openly arrogant. LaCroix was arrogant also, but he knew how to butter the player up, to praise them for their accomplishments in a way that felt like he saw the player as an equal despite their fledgling nature. Yes, there was a fair amount of boasting as if he were the one doing the hard work. He was definitely a prick. But he had a charisma to him that felt much more natural, much friendlier in a way that made you want to root for him at times. Lou amps up the arrogance, heaps on the praise, but then always makes sure that you know that she views Fire as a lesser being. Which makes even less sense since Fire is an elder, not a brand new vampire.
Here's an idea. You have one night to bring me the head of the snake. Destroy Katsumi. The rest can be cleaned up. If you can't deliver, I will announce an immediate blood hunt on every Anarch in this city.
You're becoming quite indispensable to me. So, out of all my available personnel, I'm going to entrust the retrieval of the sarcophagus to you. And you believed them. They've been trying to take over LA for years. It's a ruse, a falsehood spread to undermine my rule and turn kindred against each other, thin our ranks. They are duplicitous, evil creatures. Did they not try to kill you?
To put it simply, Lou is forced charisma that comes off as openly manipulative and obviously fake. LaCroix is genuine charisma that falls in line with his ambition for power within the Camarilla. It becomes obvious fast how he got his position over LA, how he operates within the confines of the Ventru clan with an air of grace and subtlety, as if he were this way before he was embraced and didn't simply become this way because of his sire's lineage. And you can easily have LaCroix be a special case, the case of a desperate prince in a historically Anarch-controlled city. But you have to put in the work to make Lou just as interesting in her own way. You can have a game where the Camarilla are all-powerful and the IAO is their main worry, but then don't focus on the Anarchs in the same way that you did with LA's power struggle. Like, this entire plot point has no place here. You've generally ignored the Anarchs beyond 1 or 2 quests, and now suddenly the start of this game's crescendo has you going after their leader for no fucking reason other than this was something that was kind of done in the first game. And I get that every video game is going to have to cut and tweak ideas due to scope, money, time, all that shit. But the inclusion of forcing this interaction with the Anarchs who have historically been powerless in Seattle would be like if CDPR tried to jam a pivotal point around the Scoia'tael into The Witcher 3. Sure, they had a handful of them involved in side questing, but nothing with enough depth to warrant a full-on main plot point. The Chinese room just needed to cut these superfluous events and focus their efforts on the IAO as the main enemy, with a Sabbat secondary enemy or vice versa. Yeah, it would have been just as disappointing as Yorveth not showing up in The Witcher 3, but it would have been acceptable if it made for a better and more focused plot. So we head to find Katsumi, and Tali is at her usual spot. He sees that this goose chase is born from pride and not from critical thinking and directs fire to where Katsumi is hiding out after confirming that his motives are stability rather than blind loyalty. Though, let's be honest, he'd give up Katsumi's location no matter what Fire says here because creating a game where choices matter would probably kill 10% of the development team outright. We head to the homeless shanty town and find Benny's sire, who goes,
I'm not gonna tell you where Katsumi is, you mean old elder.
Of course, every single option that I've picked with Max here throughout the entire game have been the options that he supposedly loves and respects. If it's not clear by now, this mechanic of the game has absolutely no impact, meaning, or bearing on its events. It's all just a smokescreen to make the players feel a sense of pride and accomplishment.
You say you have a plan?
Yeah. You catch a whiff of that? Anesthetic. Who do we know that could get their mitts on medical supplies?
You smell that? It smells like the only fucking path we can follow. Oh, yep, definitely the only path in the entire fucking area. Thank God for Fabian. Why, without him, we wouldn't be able to ascertain that Katsumi is a good person who helps homeless people whenever she can.
She didn't come here to hide. She came here to help. That's who you finish off if you go down this path. The kind that still gives a damn.
I mean, holy fuck. Imagine writing any kind of morally gray character in your video game. This way I'm not confused about anything, at least. If there's one thing that I hate when I play video games, it's being confused about story elements and character motivations. Fucking Blue's Clues ass video game writing. I mean, I could go on, but I'll cut myself off with this. Along the way through the random anarchs on the way to meet Katsumi, you literally find newspaper clippings, shopping lists, photos, homeless peoples in beds, just all of these things that scream at the player about how fucking angelic Katsumi is as a person. And that's literally never been a question. From the get-go, she's been this individual who's clearly more about helping her people than grabbing power in any sort of way. Like, yeah, the obvious route is right there for her to become somebody who's tired of seeing her people die and suffer under the Camarilla, but she doesn't have that nuance in her. Even then, the game jamming how good of a person she is in your face over and over is fucking nauseating. Just get it over with, dude. I would be more content with this game if I opened a door in this base and it cut to the credits with a "Thanks for playing our demo, support our early access game" message.
I wouldn't know so bad if it drove a truck with "Make Gehenna Great Again" painted on the side.
Oh my fucking god, Gehenna is an event. Said to be cyclical, it's not a location, like America. I'm gonna freak the fuck out. So we try to pry the answer as to who Katsumi is meeting with out of her, and she obviously keeps refusing. That's when the person who she was meeting with shoots at us. Terrible fucking aim, but whatever, none of this matters. We track the shooter down, and it turns out to be Damsel from the first game. Now I'm just kind of depressed about Bloodlines 2, because I honestly think that Damsel being here is a fun inclusion that could link these games together in a really interesting way if the writers had any sort of semblance of talent. Actually, you know what's funny about this? I believe Damsel's inclusion was Brian Mitsuda's idea because he hinted at somebody being integrated into the story in a way that excited him in one of his blog posts. So I have to imagine that this was the big reveal. And it's really well done too, easily one of the best interactions in the game just due to how over the top that she is. It's interesting because Damsel was very aggressive and in your face in the first game, but she blended in with a much more erratic and animated cast of lively people. Now she stands out as somebody who somehow made it into the wrong video game. Anyways, she basically tells us that while we were sent down here, the Sabbat has attacked the city outright or some dumb shit. I take this as my opportunity to sprint freely through the city for once and the game crashes. I figure that's probably a feature at this stage. I make it to the tower and surprise!
Hello, my love.
Fire!
I would clap, but I'm afraid I would injure my hands from how excited I am. So yeah, here's where everything is revealed. Here's the problem. Okay, let me rephrase. Here's a problem. I already went over the idea that Fire is portrayed as this intrinsically inquisitive and smart vampire, one who catches on to all sorts of little details. And I questioned whether he was written that way just to be that way, or if he was written that way because the writers were insecure. It's the latter. Because every fucking option that I have now is the most base, inane, stupid fragment of dialogue. There's no "I knew it" option. There's no "I would have helped you if you had been clear with me" option. There's no "I understand you" option. It's all shock and surprise and "I can't believe this" kind of shit, despite having those sorts of questions and suspicions earlier in the game at key points. And hearing Sophia go on and on about how foolish Fire was and how he fell into her trap, God, it's just the worst fucking feeling. But somehow it gets even worse. Before that though, Sophia does burn Choi alive, which was easily the coolest part of the game, so huge props for distracting me with a shiny penny for half a second. Afterwards, Sophia explains how we found her supposed body. And it's even more fucking stupid than what I pulled out of my ass haphazardly earlier. She didn't transfer her soul into a new body, she just she found somebody who looked like her and put a picture of herself on their body. Yeah, we got tricked by a body in a wig. Jesus Christ. Some way this shit does get even more stupid though, I know, it's like a hidden talent. So Sophia walks you through how she plotted all of this ever since Gideon was chained up by Lou. She turned to the Sabbat when she lost her love, which was Gideon was her love, and had planned on the Nomad draining Gideon in order for him to seize control of Fire's body. Cool, with you so far. The entire time I'm just hitting Sophia with the meanest options I can choose. Despite this, she goes, "Hey, you should join me." And you know what? I would have. But it's not an option. There is no choice to join her even if you agree with her, even if it would have just led to the bad ending of the game. So Fabian gets a bright idea just before Sophia moves in to drain Fire's power. He's like, "Yo, jump out the window into the sunlight, I have a plan." This dipshit has been the worst goddamn detective we've ever seen. He's like if you stuck Rob Gronkowski in a sleuth outfit. But Fire doesn't really have a choice. So he goes out the window and he's falling and burning and screaming, and you're sitting here like, what kind of magic power is our Malkavian friend gonna pull out of his hat? And the answer is fucking nothing. His plan was to just crawl from the street into the sewers. We're in the sun for a full 45-second count, despite just watching Choi fry in 2 seconds flat. These humans are gathered around watching this play out like our guy is protesting the persecution of Buddhists in South Vietnam. Bro looks like a Rage Against the Machine album cover. And Fabian's just like, "Yo, keep crawling, this is working!" Honestly, it's like the most egregious example of the developers just not giving a fuck about a single scrap of VTM's universe or lore. You could try to excuse a lot of the other shortcomings, but this is just like, ask anybody unfamiliar with the TTRPG's universe if vampires can be in the sun, and they're all gonna say no. This is just basic shit. And it's even dumber when you try to justify Fire as being just that powerful, because the game's universe reserves the concept of daywalking for the weaker, thin-blooded vampires. AKA, the closer to Cain a vampire's blood is, the weaker they are to the sun. When you hit the sewer, you go back into Fabian's memories. The developers have no sense of pacing, so they kinda just figured that going from the grand reveal with Sophia into another rousing round of talking to objects would make for riveting and intriguing gameplay at this very moment. It makes sense when you think about it. If you were smack in the middle of escaping from certain death and being riled up about one of the game's biggest villains, wouldn't you want to jump away from that in order to pilot a guy whose plan is to record Campbell's confession on 90-year-old technology without thinking about how he would ever actually get that recording to the people who could do anything about it?
Yes, Campbell is old and he hasn't kept up with the modern world. Neither have I, being dead and gone.
Yeah, but I have. And I know that recording devices exist.
And I actually just thought about this as I was going through all of this stuff. Why didn't Fabian just write a note to himself? Why didn't he just write down a note and put it in his desk? Wouldn't that have solved like fucking 90% of this game's problems? It doesn't matter, he's so stupid. So you once again go through 3 different layers of who gives a shit conversations with people that have barely said anything worthwhile for an entire game, all to get to Campbell and try to prod a confession out of him.
I shook off your power. You're not as good at this as you think.
Oh, that was a very stupid thing to say. You realize what it means.
Yeah. I guess that is not an ideal way to extend my prospects.
This might finally be the day, Detective, where your utility is outstripped by the magnitude of my vexation. Right now, though, I have a use for you. Oh, but first, you will break that recorder. I guess I'll break that recorder. Those things make a little whirring sound if you pay close attention.
So yeah, Fabian does the first good thing he has done in this entire game and realizes that Campbell is about to kill him, so he willingly wakes Fire to take them both out instead. The game does one more flashback to when Fabian told Sophia that he couldn't figure out where Gideon is, and she imparts one last telling statement before leaving Seattle.
Goodbye, Fabian. I wish you were as good a detective as you think you are.
So to summarize, Fabian was never supposed to be a good detective. He was always supposed to be this wacky, goofy Malkavian who everybody made fun of while he talked to every object under the moon. And obviously that's been a trend throughout the game, but what's the point of it? The goofiness doesn't endear me to him. Maybe that's a me thing. But he also doesn't turn out to actually be good at his job. So why would you ever write him this way? It makes sense if he succeeded in just one major way, but he literally never did, not without help from those much smarter and much more intuitive than him. I mean, this entire plot would make more sense if he was actually in on it, like I mentioned earlier. If he had planned with Sophia to fuse with Fire as revenge once he realized that his mind was being wiped over and over again. But he's just terrible, that's all. We're playing as a smart and intuitive character fused with a dumb and unaware one. The perfect vessel for the player to feel like the heroic elder while also having basic concepts explained to them. But the devs never took the time to craft anything special out of that, did they? So what we're left with is the main character being led around by a goofy sidekick who amounts to nothing beyond a headache with little to no insight. And instead of spending the game actually trying to endear the player to Fabian, they sunk all of their efforts into this final scene where he reveals that the way that Fire survived the sun was through him surrendering his soul, or something like that. I mean, it's all made up, but come on. The craziest part about all of this is that even at the end, I can genuinely appreciate this small crater of writing, this tiny oasis in this jumbled desert of bullshit that we've waded through. Like, to insist that it's all terrible is just me being angry. Because the part where Fabian decides to sacrifice himself, first by waking Fire up and now by warding off the sun with his own life, I mean, the notes are there, you know? This part of the song is good. It may only deepen my resentment of the game overall just because these flashes prove that the writers were at least a little inspired or weren't always bad at this. But it might just be easier to accept that I enjoyed something from this game rather than question it further. Fire wakes up in the sewers, the voice in his head gone at last. Seattle has been overrun by Sophia's unbirthed forces, and our protagonist now has to climb to the top of the tower and face the scientist once and for all. I love that for all of the talk about the IAO cracking down on the city and eliminating its vampire presence once and for all, there's not a soul on these roads for no other reason than because it would fit the vibe for Fire to walk down these empty streets on the boulevard of broken dreams. I mean, it's like that the entire way up the tower too, to be fair. The devs are just winging out their visuals and hoping for the best at this stage, as seen by the fucking specimen tubes that line the hall leading to the main office. How long has Fire been sleeping for? Weeks? Did they just move these in really quickly? I don't know. Honestly though, I don't think I've paid the visuals many compliments in this video, but they did do a fantastic job a lot of the time. It's really a shame that the plot was the thing that tore this game down after the combat and visuals really nailed it. And as you might expect, the appreciation of the finer parts of Bloodlines 2 really comes to a head in the final confrontation with Sophia. This entire scene looks amazing, and the final fight is well done, even if it's a bit annoying with its insistence on having Sophia run from you. I mean, it makes sense though, she doesn't stand a chance when I get close. It's about as good as I could hope for, all things considered. Oh, and the music's really good too. Now you're probably wondering about the plot. And the truth is, I really don't give a shit at this point. Sophia insists on taming Fire, Fire insists on putting her down. The two try to suck each other off, but Fire has more experience in that category. The screen fades out and the ending slides play, with Tali narrating what happened as if you intentionally attempted to orchestrate any of it. Apparently Lou is alive and I made her prince again for some reason. No idea why, I think I went against her word constantly at the end of the game. None of it feels like something I aimed for, but I was also pretty aimless by halfway through the game, choosing whatever option sounded the least annoying. I just don't care about any of this, the same way the writers don't care to explain where Lou went during all of this, or who exactly killed all of these people in the present times to mimic the past. The consensus that we landed on with that was that fucking Fabian did it to remind himself of the past.
Campbell and Lou faked those killings back a century. No doubt there. But who killed Dale and that vampire wannabe? Who was the rebar killer in this century?
Do you have a theory?
Maybe I did it. To lead myself to Campbell. A way to slip his control, remind myself of the past. I'd say it was convoluted of me, but I know me. And I'm nothing if not convoluted.
Which, it makes about as much sense as anyone else suddenly mimicking the rebar killer's murders. So, yeah, whatever. Again, the writing down a note and putting it in your desk idea would have really prevented all of this, but you know, it's fine, just kill some people, it's cool. I watched the credits, which roughly go on for 9 minutes. You'd be shocked to know that the people who worked at Hardsuit Labs got a shout out in the smallest font that they could muster all at once, just before the obligatory trademarks and copyrights. I've got no clue who did what exactly in this game. I tried to reach out to some people, got no answer, and really only have speculation to go off of. From what rumors I have found, it seems like Hardsuit Labs did a lot of stuff but weren't meeting their deadlines, so they got canned. And then when the Chinese room came in, they took the engine and the combat and all that stuff and kind of just made their own story that strayed away from what Hardsuit Labs was going for because they wanted to make their own story, you know, that kind of thing. So I think that's what's going on here. I don't know. But to me, it's pretty damn telling when the Hardsuit Labs team was ousted with little warning and their contributions were narrowed down to a legal requirement on the back end of 40 pages of people. No definition of who they were, what they worked on, or anything like that, which is pretty scummy to me. Bloodlines 2 is an affront to the fans of Vampire the Masquerade, a joke of a plot that has good moments but ultimately just shits the bed entirely. Established lore in the Masquerade's universe feels like it's included as if it's an Easter egg and not the foundation for a memorable story. The writers clearly had zero care to make the game connect to its source material, making this entire endeavor feel like it had no soul. And the craziest part about that is that if you had removed these references and tried to have the game stand as its own new universe, it would have had to invent so much lore to fill in the blanks that I think these writers would have had an aneurysm trying to come up with something that made sense. It feels like they saw this universe and went, oh, these are good ideas, and just made shit up after setting up the basics of the game that they ripped inspiration from. I've said before that developers like 343 Games were fans of the series that they got promoted to writing for. And while I don't always agree with the direction that developers like that went in, you could still see that they truly cared about the franchise that they were now directly a part of. I can almost completely confidently state that whoever took over the writing from the original Bloodlines 2 staff did not care about this series that they took over whatsoever. They just wanted to tell their detective story, preferably in walking simulator format. The side quests were practically non-existent piles of garbage that looped the same 3 objectives over and over. The superfluous characters had 20 lines of dialogue about their background and never took the time to actually form any sort of bond to the player, despite there being this dumbass dated emotion system popping up in the top right consistently. The main plot is constantly disrupted by a detective sequence that needed to be cut down to half the length with double the intrigue to actually feel good to play through. The developers failed to capture the wacky elements of the first game in a way that felt charming rather than off-putting. There was zero respect for the lore of the universe, which was paired with a scope that embodied way too many shallow entities to be entertaining. Dialogue was a confusing heap of thoughts that felt like 4 different writers pitching in a sentence over and over while moving things in a single direction. Player choice is non-existent until the end of the game, and the main story is so exhausting that it didn't matter if there were real decisions to make. The only things done remotely right were the combat and the visuals, but even the former started to wear down with how the city that you're stuck in is generally structured. Even if you're mindlessly playing this game and don't care about Vampire the Masquerade, you would be better off playing Dishonored. In conclusion, this game is ass. Thanks for watching. I'm gonna go do the Phantom Liberty DLC now. Until I get that video out though, I have a merch shop with merch from good games on it. I have a Twitch where I stream on most Tuesdays and Fridays. I have a Twitter where I tweet out my new stuff. And I have a Patreon. And that's it. Have a good one.